Chapter 6:18. Only 1,250 Sword Venerables participated in the fourth round. Basically, the Sword Venerables who could make it to this round were all very powerful. None of them were high-level Sword Venerables. At the very least, they were peak Sword Venerables. The chances of a well-matched opponent appearing were getting higher and higher. The battles were getting more and more intense. The top 10 Sword Venerables still defeated their opponents with a single sword strike. Regardless of whether their opponents were peak Sword Venerables or peak Sword Venerables, none of them could force them to use their full strength. In the 358th battle, Chu Mu appeared on the Myriad battle platform once again. "I've said it before, I'll leave my sword with you first. I'll take it back with your life." Chu Mu's opponent had a cold look in his eyes. It was the same Sword Venerables who attacked Chu Mu on the way to the unparalleled Sword Venerables gathering in an attempt to steal Boeing. "Here, I'll take your life first." As soon as his voice faded, he didn't give Chu Mu a chance to speak. He unsheathed his sword and the sword light split into several hundred rays, bombarding Chu Mu from all directions like a meteor shower. It seemed to be impossible for Chu Mu to dodge. However, Chu Mu turned the impossible into possible. His figure fluttered like a ghost as he shuttled through the dense sword light like a meteor shower, rapidly approaching his opponent. The Sword Venerable's eyes turned cold as a cold smile appeared on his face. He slashed out with his sword that had accumulated enough energy. With a swoosh, a river of stars rushed out from the void and crossed the entire Myriad battle platform. It very exquisitely filled the gap of the meteor shower sword light of the first sword strike. Moreover, the two merged into one, increasing the power by several times. Chu Mu's pupils rapidly shrank as a bright light condensed in his eyes. It was as resplendent as a cold star. He stared at one point of the river of stars and unsheathed his desolate sky sword. His strength, sword origin, and sword intent poured into the sword. The power penetrated the tip of the sword and condensed into one point, landing on one point of the river of stars. Kill. There seemed to be a cracking sound as a point of the river of stars was destroyed by Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu's figure was like a specter as he shuttled through the river of stars, appearing in front of his opponent and erasing him with a single sword strike. His opponent clearly hadn't expected Chu Mu to break through his sword technique in such a manner. Just as he was about to react, he was already a beat too late. Chu Mu's sword silently appeared before his eyes, and a tearing pain came from his neck. A slash to the throat. Too exquisite! Chu Mu's swordsmanship caused another round of exclamations. There were a total of 625 sword masters participating in the fifth round of battles. These 625 sword masters were basically at the level of powerful top sword masters, but some of them were unfathomable. For example, Chu Mu was one of them. To this day, no one knew exactly how strong he was. There was also a sword venerable in his 30s called Dong Mai, and a sword venerable in his 40s called Wu Ping. There were a total of 312 battles in the fifth round, and one of them had a bye. It had to be said that Chu Mu was very lucky. He had a bye and advanced to the sixth round. In the sixth round, there were 313 sword venerable. Besides Chu Mu, the rest of the sword venerable were at the ultimate sword master level. Although there were a total of 156 battles in the sixth round, and another sword venerable was lucky enough to advance, luck couldn't always be with Chu Mu alone. In the 36th battle, Chu Mu appeared on the 10,000 battle platform. His opponent was a female ultimate sword venerable, known as the Absolute Ice Venerable. The aura around the Absolute Ice Swordmaster was extremely cold. Even the air was frozen under the influence of the cold aura, forming countless fragments. The Absolute Ice Swordmaster was as cold as her name. It was as if there was nothing in the world that could move her. Chu Mu had seen a few of her battles before. He roughly knew that she had mastered a variant of the Ice Venerable one. The Ice Venerable one. Furthermore, she seemed to have only mastered the Ice Venerable one. Perhaps it was because she had only mastered one type of ice, Venerable One. As she continued to study it, her mastery of the ice, Venerable One, had reached its limit. She was a frightening opponent. The absolute ice swordmaster did not say anything. He pulled out his sword and streaks of ice were unleashed. They covered half of the 10,000 battle platform and the cold aura descended. Every icicle was as thick as an arm and flashed with a clear radiance. They were like 1,000-year-old ice and exuded a frightening coldness that froze everything. This attack seemed similar to his previous opponents, but it was much more profound. It gave Chu Mu a feeling that it was difficult to dodge. That was because between every icicle, there seemed to be a formless connection. There was a formless energy that was arranged. If Chu Mu wanted to pass through the gaps, he was bound to trigger that formless energy. She is indeed the ultimate sword, Venerable. I feel like I can't dodge a single sword technique. As he thought to himself, Chu Mu slashed out with his sword, and a dark golden crescent moon tore through the sky. Moon slashing sword technique. Chu Mu is using his sword technique. He is finally using his sword technique. I thought he was going to use his sword technique against his opponent. The ultimate sword, Venerable, is not something an elite sword, Venerable, can compare to. The crescent moon slash broke through the sky and clashed with the icicles in an instant. Explosions sounded and streaks of icicles exploded. Countless icicles shot towards Chu Mu like a swarm of locusts. They covered the entire sky. Chu Mu moved his feet and waved his sword. It seemed simple, but it was impenetrable. Not a single icicle could get close to him. As the icicles landed, the ground of the 10,000 battle platform was covered with a layer of frost. It was as if it was turning into a world of ice and snow. The absolute ice swordmaster's first sword technique was successful. Such an environment was the most advantageous for her. She could unleash her powers to the fullest. As she waved her sword, streaks of icy sword radiance pierced through the air. They were straight and curved, displaying the absolute ice swordmaster's terrifying control over the sword radiance. The streaks of icy sword radiance gave Chu Mu a feeling that he had nowhere to hide. The icy aura locked onto him. No matter how he tried to dodge, he would be hit. The flying goose illusory steps was unleashed and the ultimacy of illusionary and corporeal was unleashed to the extreme. Chu Mu's figure became erratic. It seemed both real and illusory. This caused the absolute ice sword master to crease his brows. He could not differentiate between real and illusory. 72% of the ultimacy of illusionary and corporeal was equivalent to 102% of the normal ultimacy. The flying goose illusory steps was also improved by Chu Mu many times. It was already at the extreme. When he unleashed it with all his might, many ultimate sword venerables could not see through it. Although they could not see it clearly, the absolute ice sword master had his own way of dealing with it. Ice seal. A stern shout rang out. The voice was ice cold to the extreme, as if it wanted to freeze everything. A sword was waved and, in a split second, countless icy auras seemed to gush out from the void. A terrifying chill descended and Chu Mu felt as if his blood was about to freeze. His body was frozen stiff. His flying swan illusory steps were restricted and his speed dropped. A layer of frost pervaded his protective sword aura. The entire environment of the 10,000 battle stage changed completely. It was as if it had turned into a world of ice and snow. The absolute ice sword master seemed to have fused with this world of ice and snow. His figure became erratic and appeared everywhere. This was not the ultimacy of space. It was a special ability that came from attaining a high level of compatibility with the surrounding environment. It was an ability that the absolute ice sword master obtained after he mastered the ultimacy of ice to the extreme. It could also be considered a movement technique. The absolute ice sword master's mastery of his own strength and the timing of his battle had reached a high level. It was obvious that he was someone who had been through many life and death battles. As he unleashed his sword, his attacks were continuous and gave Chu Mu a sense of endless pressure. For the first time, Chu Mu felt powerless. The powers of the absolute ice sword master were too strong. She was like a mobile cannon that specialized in long-range attacks. She had grasped the essence of it and was using all her firepower to suppress Chu Mu. It seems like Chu Mu's defeat is inevitable. Yes, let's see how long he can last. Chu Mu specializes in close combat while Absolute Ice specializes in long-distance attack. The two of them are the exact opposite. From the sword technique just now, it can be seen that Chu Mu's current powers are at the level of an elite sword grandmaster. There is an obvious difference between him and Absolute Ice. Unless Chu Mu can get close to Absolute Ice, there's no way he can turn the situation around. I think it's very difficult. Absolute Ice's long-distance attacks are too strong. She only comprehended one ultimacy, but her mastery of this ultimacy is much better than others. Furthermore, she also possesses a certain level of close combat abilities. Even if Chu Mu gets close to her, he may not be her match. The obvious difference in their powers caused the sword grandmasters to not have high hopes for Chu Mu. All of them believed that Chu Mu would lose. At such a time, how can you turn the situation around? Su Haosha stared at Chu Mu and thought to himself. Chu Mu used all his strength to avoid the attacks of the Extreme Ice Sword Master. The Extreme Ice Sword Master's sword origin was very strong and her recovery speed was very fast. She could sustain such an attack for more than an hour, but Chu Mu did not have the confidence to last that long. Find a chance to get close to her. This was Chu Mu's only chance to turn the situation around. It seems like I can only use the space esoteric meaning. After dodging a few more times, Chu Mu's hair was covered with a layer of frost. His speed was affected and decreased again. If this continued, the situation would become even more disadvantageous for him. Since he decided, Chu Mu did not hesitate anymore. His figure flashed and he used the inverse space step. In the instant that he disappeared, the Extreme Ice Sword Master unleashed a huge ball of frost. In the eyes of others, it was as if Chu Mu was hit. Even the Extreme Ice Sword Master had such a feeling. In the next moment, a sense of danger surged from the bottom of his heart. The Extreme Ice Sword Master's expression changed slightly. A ball of frost exploded from his body and spread in all directions. The strong force wanted to push Chu Mu away. This was the Extreme Ice Sword Master's way of dealing with close combat opponent. It was very effective. However, as the frost passed by, Chu Mu's figure disappeared mysteriously. When the Extreme Ice Sword Master realized that something was wrong, she saw a cold radiance from the corner of her eyes. It was like a white steed flashing across a crevice. It cut through her armor of frost and became the last thing she saw. 2 inverse space steps and a killer sword technique. Chu Mu completed an almost impossible counterattack. He turned the situation around and killed the Extreme Ice Sword Master. The head of the Extreme Ice Sword Master flew high into the sky. A look of shock appeared on his face. His expression was very weird. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:19. He's dead. The head that was rolling in midair attracted the attention of countless swordsmen. It also attracted the full attention of the dozens of consciousnesses that were circling in midair. They were all stunned. Just when they thought that Chu Mu was going to lose, Chu Mu made a shocking comeback. He used reality to tell them that he was going to win this battle. As his body converted into white light, Chu Mu appeared on his seat. His depleted sword origin and spiritual awareness were all recovered. The Extreme Ice Sword Master also appeared on his seat. As he looked at Chu Mu, his gaze was cold and filled with a strong sense of unwillingness. Under normal circumstances, Chu Mu should have been killed by her. But the result was the opposite. This made the Extreme Ice Sword Master unable to accept it. That was because in her heart, Chu Mu was not as powerful as her. Chu Mu did not bother about the gaze of the extreme ice sword master. Instead, he was thinking about the battle just now. The difference in their powers was too obvious, causing him to be suppressed by the extreme ice sword master. If it was another top sword master, he would have been defeated by the extreme ice sword master in less than 3 moves. At the last moment, he used the inverted space step twice to avoid the attack of the extreme ice sword master's icy frost ring. Only then did he grab the best opportunity to use the steel slashing sword technique to destroy the extreme ice sword master's icy frost armor before killing him. In terms of timing, even a slight difference in the outcome would have led to a different outcome. It could be said that besides not using the dual sword mantra and the heaven-burying secret sword, Chu Mu had already used his full strength. This person's swordplay has shocked me once again. Yes, I thought that his swordplay was already shocking enough. I did not expect him to hold back. He actually has such a frightening swordplay that is comparable to other sword technique. I thought of a legend. Suddenly, the consciousnesses of the swordsmen became silent. Obviously, they knew about the legend. But a legend was ultimately a legend. It was an unproven fantasy. His swordplay is divine. That is ultimately a fantasy. No, since there is a legend, there must be someone who can do it. It's just that we don't know who and when. Don't tell me you think that Chu Mu can reach the level of divine swordplay? Maybe it's possible, maybe not possible. It was a legend that swordsmanship could reach divinity. Since ancient times, some sword saints had spent a lot of time studying it, but they were still unable to do so. Legend had it that only the sword god was capable of doing so. However, in the ancient sword continent, sword god was just a title. It had never appeared in legends. The sword saints' divine senses fell silent again. Although they were talking, they didn't think that Chu Mu could reach the level of godlike swordsmanship, even if the swordsmanship he displayed was so profound. Let's not talk about his sword skills. Did you all notice the profoundness that this child comprehended? One is a mutation of the metal profound. It should be a very high-level profound. The other is even more powerful than the true and false profound. The last one is the rare space profound. If that old man in the void knows about this, he might just rush out and forcefully take him in as a disciple. The sword saints were shocked by Chu Mu's swordsmanship. Almost every one of them decided that if they were to become Chu Mu's opponent, they couldn't let Chu Mu get close to them no matter what. The power of his close combat swordplay is shocking. That unknown footwork is also very mysterious. He's really a tough opponent. Many of the sword saints felt their heads hurt. This was because they simulated a battle between themselves and Chu Mu. In the end, they realized that it was very difficult to finish off Chu Mu in a short period of time. Chu Mu's ability to dodge was too shocking. If they couldn't finish off Chu Mu in a short period of time, it meant that Chu Mu could get close to them. Once Chu Mu got close to them, the extreme ice sword master had already explained the consequences to everyone. His powers are at the level of an elite sword saint, but his close combat skills are at the level of an ultimate sword saint. Maybe only the top 10 sword saints can really suppress him. After the 6th round of battles ended, the 7th round started. For Zhu Wudao and the rest, they had already been eliminated and became spectators. There were a total of 157 sword saints who advanced to the 7th round. One of them was destined to get a bye. The remaining 156 sword saints would fight 78 battles. The losers would be eliminated and the winners would advance to the 8th round. In this round of battles, Chu Mu became a spectator. No one knew whether it was because the sword saints were taking care of him or because of his luck, but he got a bye. In the 7th round of battles, the top 10 sword saint cultivators didn't encounter each other. It could be seen that this was a selective battle and not truly random. Otherwise, the top 10 sword saint cultivators wouldn't have encountered each other even once in the 7th round. The last round was always the best. No one had any opinions about this. Maybe they were used to leaving the most powerful sword saints to fight at the end. With regards to Chu Mu being able to advance to the 8th round, many sword saints were envious and jealous. They felt that he was too lucky. There were a total of 79 sword saints who advanced to the 8th round, which meant that another sword saint would be lucky enough to get a bye. The other sword saints would have to fight 39 battles. The first battle of the 8th round began. One of the top 10 sword saints, Sword Saint Xiaolu, Lu Xiaolu, would fight against another ultimate sword saint called Dong Mai. So far, Lu Xiaolu hadn't shown much of his strength. He hadn't used his ultimate sword Wei either because he didn't have a strong enough opponent. As for Dong Mai, he hadn't shown his true strength either. It made people feel like they couldn't see through him. Therefore, the two of them fighting was more or less exciting. Without saying anything, he attacked directly. It was a probing attack from the beginning. He used a sword technique that wasn't powerful but was fast. After fighting for a few breaths, it seemed that they were evenly matched. "You're quite capable. Have a taste of my ultimate sword Wei." Lu Xiaolu smiled faintly. "I'll let you have a taste of my boundless sword Wei too," Dong Mai replied. Most of the 10,000 sword saints who participated in the unparalleled sword saint gathering didn't receive any sword Wei inheritance. Sword Wei inheritance wasn't something that could be obtained from the mainland. It wasn't something that could be obtained just because one wanted to. It didn't mean that swordsmen who received sword Wei inheritance were stronger than those who didn't. It was just a relative term. But no matter what, under most circumstances, those who obtained the inheritance of the sword Dao would often be able to go further and obtain greater strength. Lu Xiaolu versus Dong Mai. It was a clash between the ultimate sword Wei and the boundless sword Wei. Fight. Sword Wei manifestation. Behind Lu Xiaolu, there seemed to be the embryonic form of a boundless small world, while behind Dong Mai there was a vast expanse of heaven and earth. That was a sign that they had comprehended their respective sword arts to a certain extent. Sword Wei manifestation. As a veteran sword saint and one of the top 10 sword saints, it was impossible for them to not have comprehended sword Wei to the sword Wei manifestation. A terrifying aura spread out. Even with the seal of the 10,000 battle platform, the sword saints in the seats could still feel it. The ultimate sword Wei had no beginning and no end. Only the ultimate sword Wei existed eternally. The boundless sword Wei was vast and boundless. It was a clash between people, swords, and sword Wei. In terms of sword origin cultivation, Lu Xiaolu and Dong Mai were actually on par. In terms of the power of their sword techniques, they also seemed to be on par with each other. In terms of battle experience, it could be said that they were evenly matched. The only way to determine the winner was to see how much they had comprehended their respective sword Weis. Sword Wei manifestation was still divided into different levels. However, the two of them were really evenly matched. The battle was unusually intense. They each had their own means and were equally matched. Dong Mai is so strong. It seems that he's qualified to be one of the top 10 sword saints. Don't be silly. The top 10 sword saints represent 10 people. If he defeats Lu Xiaolu, Dong Mai will be one of the top 10 sword saints. Dong Mai is strong, but how can he defeat Lu Xiaolu? Now that they're evenly matched, it's hard to say who will win. Let's wait and see. The other 9 sword venerables, who were also part of the top 10 sword venerables, were also watching the battle attentively. Lu Xiaolu's strength was not much different from theirs. Since Dong Mai was able to fight Lu Xiaolu to this extent, it was enough to prove that Dong Mai was strong enough to make them take him seriously. At the thought of this, some of the honorable swordsmen looked at Wu Ping. This honorable swordsman had an ordinary name and an ordinary appearance. Just like Dong Mai, no one could see through him. They wondered if he was as strong as Dong Mai. The battle between Lu Xiaolu and Dong Mai was unusually intense. The ultimate sword Wei and the boundless sword Wei continued to collide. Terrifying energy raged in the 10,000 battle platform. Fortunately, the platform was not ordinary. Otherwise, it would have been destroyed by the impact. After a long battle, both Lu Xiaolu and Dong Mai used secret techniques to temporarily increase their strength. Even if they died in the 10,000 battle platform, they would recover once they were outside. Therefore, although there were repercussions from using secret techniques, they would disappear quickly. Killing the opponent was the most important thing. Under the secret techniques, Lu Xiaolu and Dong Mai's strength increased exponentially. The battle became even more intense. It was a visual feast for the eyes of the Sword Saint. Die. After a long battle, Dong Mai took a blow in exchange for Lu Xiaolu's life. He broke out and cut Lu Xiaolu in half. As for himself, his left arm and shoulder were cut off by Lu Xiaolu. Dong Mai won. Dong Mai is ranked among the top 10 Sword Saints. I can't say that Dong Mai is stronger than Lu Xiaolu, but there is no doubt that he won. Next time, I will win it back. Lu Xiaolu's face did not show any signs of depression. His defeat did not make him feel bad. He was very determined. Then again, if they were to fight again, it would be hard to predict who would win in the end. Dong Mai was not confident that he would win. The battles continued, and the other 9 honorable swordsmen did not meet each other. Wu Ping, who could not be seen through, steadily defeated his opponent and successfully advanced to the 9th round. His fighting style was obviously different from Dong Mai's. One battle after another, the 39th battle was soon over. One of the contestants had a bye. It was Chu Mu. This guy actually advanced to the 9th round. He's so lucky. It's not necessarily luck, but he definitely won't be able to win next. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 620. In the 9th round of the Unparalleled Sword Master Gathering, there were a total of 40 sword masters participating in 20 battles. In the first battle, the Rakshasa sword master Luo Fei fought against an ultimate sword master. She used the Rakshasa sword Wei to defeat her opponent. In the second battle, the flying celestial sword master Wan Qingxian fought against an ultimate sword master. Similarly, he had to use the flying celestial sword Wei to defeat his opponent. In the third battle, the Fengwu swordmaster, Feng Wujin, used the heaven-sealing sword Wei. It was a sword Wei that did not have strong attacking power and focused on sealing. It was very difficult to deal with. Although his opponent was strong, he was defeated in the end. In the fourth battle, the Tianyang swordmaster, Jing Yang, fought. In the fifth battle, the Golden Jade swordmaster, Ji Qing, fought. In the sixth battle, the Earth King swordmaster, Xiahou Wang, fought. In the seventh battle, the White Cloud swordmaster, Yun Yun, fought. In the eighth battle, the Vast Expanse swordmaster, Dong Mai, fought. He defeated Lu Xiaolu and became one of the top 10 swordmasters. In the ninth battle, the Vast Swordmaster, Su Haosha, fought against the Mortal Swordmaster, Wu Ping. Some sword Weis only had one inheritor. As long as one did not die, there would not be another inheritor. Su Haosha's Vast Expanse sword Wei and Wu Ping's Mortal sword Wei belonged to this type of sword Wei. The vast sword Dao was majestic, mighty, and boundless. There was a kind of general trend. The mortal sword Dao seemed to be very ordinary, yet it actually contained various profundities within it. It was ordinary yet strange, and it was peaceful yet fierce. This battle was not as difficult as the one between Lu Xiaolu and Dong Mai. Su Haosha's strength was extremely strong. After both of them used their sword Weis, Su Haosha displayed overwhelming strength. Even if Wu Ping used a secret technique to increase his strength, he could only hold on for a short while before he was defeated by Su Haosha. Su Haosha did not use a secret technique. At the cost of a light injury, he defeated Wu Ping and retained his position as one of the top 10 swordmasters. In the 10th battle, the identities of the two combatants were already known. This was the last battle of the 9th round. The Lai Mountain Swordmaster, Lai Mountain Tiger vs. the Zhen Tian Sword Master, Chu Mu. In a flash, Chu Mu and Lai Mountain Tiger appeared on the 10,000 battle platform, facing each other. The glory of unparalleled swordsmanship, the glory of unparalleled comprehension, it's all useless. Today you will die under my sword. As soon as Lai Shanhu opened his mouth, his tone was aggressive and aggressive. His eyes were as sharp as swords, piercing into Chu Mu's eyes and attacking his mind. At this moment, Lai Shanhu's aura was extremely shocking. It was as if he despised everything and could crush everything. Chu Mu did not reveal an indignant expression, nor did he sneer disdainfully. He only had a calm expression and did not refute. He knew very well that with his current strength, it would be difficult for him to defeat Lai Shanhu. It could even be said that he had no hope of winning, because the gap between their strengths was too obvious. It had reached a point where he could not cross over. Therefore, no matter what he said, it would only put him at a disadvantage. Your strength is indeed not bad, but I only need 3 moves to kill you. When Lai Shanhu saw that Chu Mu was unmoved, his tone became even sharper, as if he was determined to suppress Chu Mu's aura. The aura on his body became even more intense. Please. Chu Mu only replied indifferently. It was like a breeze blowing past his ears, instantly dissolving the tension and the terrifying aura released by Lai Shanhu. In terms of strength, he was indeed not as good as Lai Shanhu, but in terms of aura, he would not lose to him. A vague surprise flashed in Lai Shanhu's eyes. He thought more highly of Chu Mu. His tone was very arrogant, aggressive and sharp. It seemed that he did not take Chu Mu seriously at all. However, as a senior revered sword artist, he was able to survive countless life and death situations, and was recognized as one of the top 10 revered sword artists. He was not an ignorant person who was arrogant but incompetent. In every battle, no matter if it was a competition or a life or death battle, no matter if his opponent was strong or weak, he had never underestimated his opponent. His disdain and contempt on the surface was just a tactic to attack his opponent. Lai Shanhu gazed at Chu Mu, a bright light flashing in his eyes. His tyrannical consciousness penetrated through the air and approached him. His right hand grasped the hilt of his sword, and he slowly pulled it out. It was a sword that was wider than an ordinary sword. There were patterns engraved on the body of the sword, and one could vaguely see the shape of those patterns. It was a roaring tiger, and it was very lifelike. As the sword was pulled out, a vigorous roar seemed to resound in the 10,000 battles platform, like a tiger roaring in the forest. When the sword was pulled out of the scabbard, the aura on Lai Shanhu's body skyrocketed. It was like a flood, like a mountain collapsing, and almost suffocating Chu Mu. Lai Shanhu was an expert in both the earth and fire profound, and had reached the peak level. He had inherited the mountain sword art, and his strength was extremely tyrannical. Chu Mu could only feel that as Lai Shanhu's aura spread out, it was as if an endless mountain had appeared out of nowhere, and was suppressing him. It was as if his body was being suppressed by a terrifying pressure, and he could not move at all. No wonder Lai Shanhu was one of the top 10 sword sovereigns. This kind of aura made Yi Chen have no choice but to treat it seriously. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu let out a low roar that sounded like rolling thunder. A tyrannical aura burst out from the body of the desolate sky sword, and a desolate aura spread out, faintly resisting Lai Shanhu's mountain aura. They were evenly matched, and each of them occupied half of the battle platform. If I want to kill him within 3 sword moves, then I can't compete with him in sword arts. Lai Shanhu gazed at Chu Mu and said inwardly. Chu Mu's sword arts were too tyrannical. Although Lai Shanhu was confident that he could not defeat or even kill Chu Mu, it would take him a lot of time, and he would not be able to kill him within 3 sword moves. He decided to use his true strength and kill Chu Mu within 3 sword moves. Mountain sword art, shattering mountains and splitting earth. With a low roar in his heart, Lai Shanhu's aura instantly doubled. He suddenly jumped up and appeared at the highest point of the myriad battle platform. Holding the sword above his head with both hands, he seemed to have turned into an ancient mountain. A heavy aura pressed down, as if it wanted to press the entire myriad battle platform into the ground. With a loud roar, the sword slashed down. In an instant, it was as if a mountain had collapsed and the earth had split open, causing everyone's expression to change. Chumu will lose for sure. Under this sword, Chumu will die for sure. Outside the myriad battle platform, the sword venerables in the seating area were all shocked, and each of them said inwardly. It was not that they were looking down on Chumu, but Lai Shanhu's sword move was too terrifying. Its might covered the entire myriad battle platform, and there was no way to dodge it. Only Su Haosha's expression did not change, and a trace of a smile hung on the corner of his mouth. This was because he knew that Chumu had comprehended the rarely seen profound of space. With a boom, the entire myriad battle platform shook, and a terrifying energy shockwave spread out, bombarding the surrounding seals and wreaking havoc, making it impossible for people to see what was happening on the myriad battle platform. Suddenly, Lai Shanhu's heart shook, and a dangerous aura spread out from his body. He quickly turned around, and his sword was like a tornado as it collided with Chumu's sword. An ear-piercing clang resounded and sparks flew. The two swords collided, and a vacuum wave blasted out from the point of collision. It impacted Chumu and Lai Shanhu, causing them to fly back in the air. "How did you dodge my sword?" Lai Shanhu stabilized his body, and his sword vibrated at high speed. Waves of pain came from his right hand, and he couldn't hide the shock on his face as he asked. Although he didn't use sword Dao manifestation, the might of that sword move was extremely terrifying. It covered the entire myriad battle platform, and Chumu was actually unharmed, and even strangely appeared behind him to attack. Lai Shanhu was puzzled, and so were the other sword venerables. Only Su Haosha and the other sword saints knew. The profound of space is indeed a supreme profound. Su Haosha sighed inwardly. If it were him, he would have no other choice but to meet force with force. Chumu didn't answer, and his expression became even more serious. His sword move just now was cutting iron, but it was actually blocked by Lai Shanhu. Two more moves. Seeing that Chumu didn't answer, Lai Shanhu didn't ask any more questions. The fierce tiger sword stopped vibrating, and his palm recovered as he waved it again. With a roar, the tiger pattern on the fierce tiger sword seemed to come alive, transforming into an ancient tiger. It roared in the air and rushed toward Chumu, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The cutting moon sword was unsheathed, and the dark golden crescent moon pierced through the air toward the tiger. Chumu's figure changed, and strangely appeared behind Lai Shanhu again, thrusting his sword in the air, and a deep purple aurora pierced through the air. Bipolar. The tiger was formed by the fusion of the profound of earth, the profound of fire, and the sword intent. Its might was terrifying, and it shattered the dark golden crescent moon with one claw. With a roar, it rushed toward Chumu. Lai Shanhu quickly turned around, and his sword slashed down from the sky. The tyrannical sword shattered the purple aurora, and another sword thrust out. At the same time, he shouted, "Third sword!" A vague shadow of a mountain condensed and pressed down. All of a sudden, Chumu felt as if the space around him had been sealed, and a terrifying pressure came from all directions. The tiger roared and rushed over, raising its claws to slap Chumu, as if it wanted to smash Chumu's head like a watermelon. Such a powerful pressure! It is hard for me to perform the inverted air step. Chumu was shocked. The profound of space was indeed the highest profound, and was extremely powerful. However, Chumu had only comprehended 45% of it, which was only at the initial level. Adding the fact that he did not have a deep understanding of the profound of space, he was suppressed by Lai Shanhu's sword attack. It was a sword attack of the mountain sword Dao, which did not aim to kill the enemy, but to suppress and confine the opponent. It was the best way to deal with the profound of space, which was not powerful enough. As the tiger claw fell, Chu Mu's head was about to be smashed into pieces. His sword yuan exploded, and a sword appeared in his left hand, hacking toward the tiger claw. The mountain-shaking power was activated, and it was used to deflect and borrow the force, blowing away the tiger claw. Meanwhile, Chu Mu borrowed the force to rush to the side, and the 8 desolate sky swords slashed out in the air, creating a crack in the mountain shadow. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chu Mu rushed out like a ghost. After 3 sword attacks, Chu Mu was still alive. Lai Shanhu's face suddenly turned ugly. Lai Shanhu has been slapped in the face. This Chu Mu is indeed tenacious. I can't believe that he managed to survive 3 sword attacks of Lai Shanhu. I guess Lai Shanhu has been completely enraged. Next, he will attack with all of his power. Sky-burying secret sword art, dual polarity. Seizing the opportunity, Chu Mu thrust out his sword. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:21. The purple aurora was extremely deep and bright. It pierced through the sky and shot towards Lai Shanhu at an unimaginably fast speed. It was so fast that Lai Shanhu couldn't react in time. With a sizzling sound, Lai Shanhu's protective sword aura was pierced through. At this critical moment, he tried his best to dodge. The purple aurora that was shooting towards his throat hit his right chest. The king-grade armor shook violently, and after one breath, it was pierced through. The purple aurora shot into Lai Shanhu's right chest. His sword origin and sword intent were fully activated. They turned into a mountain shadow and appeared in his right chest, blocking the purple aurora from going further. The purple aurora was shattered. Blood flowed out of Lai Shanhu's right chest. Injured, you actually injured me. Lowering his head and looking at his right chest, Lai Shanhu was startled. He mumbled to himself, "You actually injured me. I will kill you, kill you." Lai Shanhu roared, his voice turning into a thunderous roar that shook the mountains. "You actually injured me. I will kill you, kill you." With a boom, a violent and heavy aura exploded from Lai Shanhu's body. Because the invisible aura was too strong, it turned into streams of air and rolled out like a flood. It was like a storm passing through, destroying everything in its path. Lai Shanhu was furious. A mountain shadow appeared behind his back, suppressing the earth. Mountain sword art. Heaven falls and earth rends. A somewhat hoarse voice roared out. He slashed his sword towards Chu Mu. Sword art manifestation. A smile appeared on Chu Mu's slightly pale face. He didn't resist and let the horrifying sword attack hit his body. In that instant, the horrifying power shattered his body into pieces. Chu Mu could feel the destruction of his body in the extreme pain. A mysterious feeling emerged in his mind. Death. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu appeared in his seat again. Rebirth. It was too fast. That mysterious feeling disappeared as soon as Chu Mu felt it. However, that feeling turned into a seed and fell into his heart. Chu Mu's defeat was inevitable. However, Lai Shanhu had said that he would kill Chu Mu within 3 sword strikes. In the end, not only did he use the 4th sword strike, he was also injured by Chu Mu. Therefore, he did not win in a very straightforward manner. It's a pity that his cultivation base is not high enough. His comprehension of sword intent and profound is also not high enough. Otherwise, Lai Shanhu would not be his opponent. What this kid lacks is time. The sword saints conversed with their divine wills. At the end of the 9th round of battles, a total of 10 sword venerables had advanced to the 10th round, which happened to be the top 10 sword venerables. Very quickly, Chu Mu's performance was temporarily forgotten by the crowd, because the 10th round of battles was even more exciting. The battle between the top 10 sword venerables, the glory of unparalleled combat strength would appear among the 10 of them. First battle of the 10th round. Flying Celestial Swordmaster Wan Qingxian vs. Earth King Swordmaster Xiahou Wang. Since they were both in the top 10 of the Sword Sovereign, the difference in strength shouldn't be too obvious. If the two sides wanted to determine the victor, they would have to use their Sword Dao. Furthermore, they would have to use their Sword Dao to manifest their Sword Dao. Flying Celestial Sword Dao vs. Earth Sword Dao. When the Sword Dao manifested, a white-robed swordsman appeared behind Wan Qingxian, as if a sword immortal had descended to the mortal world. Behind Xiahou Wang, a vast expanse of land appeared, stretching as far as the eye could see. Secret techniques were used, and their strength multiplied. Sword out. Flying Celestial Sword Dao, a heavenly celestial. Earth Sword Dao, a heaven and earth upheaval. After an intense collision, the flying celestial shattered, and the earth cracked. Wan Qingxian and his sword became one, and his white robe fluttered in the wind. He pierced through the layers of energy, as if he came from the heavens, and stabbed towards Xiahou Wang. Xiahou Wang was shocked. He waved his heavy sword, and it was as if he had brought up the land, crushing it. Wan Qingxian's body flew backwards, and he spat out blood, his face pale. Xiahou Wang's forehead was pierced, and blood dripped. He died. Wan Qingxian won. Second battle of the 10th round. Golden Jade Swordmaster Ji Qingyu vs. White Cloud Swordmaster Yun Yun. Jade Sword Dao vs. Cloud Sword Dao. Jade Sword Dao, cutting gold and breaking jade. Cloud Sword Dao, a cloud illusion and cloud destruction. The ever-changing sea of clouds was cut open by a golden jade sword radiance. White Cloud Swordmaster Yun Yun was defeated. Third battle of the 10th round. Vast Swordmaster Dong Mai vs. Swordmaster Feng Wujin. Limitless Sword Dao vs. Sealing Heaven Sword Dao. Limitless Sword Dao, a limitless heaven and earth. Sealing Heaven Sword Dao, or sealing heaven and earth. It was undeniable that the heaven-sealing sword Wei was truly shameless. Once the heaven-sealing sword Wei was used, Dong Mai's boundless sword Wei was sealed as well, rendering him unable to use it. However, Feng Wujin was unable to use the heaven-sealing sword Wei as well, as it was a special way of the sword that did not have much destructive power. Since they could not use their sword Dao, the two of them used their secret techniques and sword technique. It was an intense battle. In the end, Feng Wujin won. Since he had inherited a special sword Dao like Sealing Heaven Sword Dao, he naturally needed to strengthen himself in other areas. Otherwise, how could he win if he could not use his sword Dao? Fourth battle of the 10th round. Heavenly Sun Swordmaster Jing Yang vs. Rakshasa Swordmaster Luo Fei. True Yang Sword Dao vs. Rakshasa Sword Dao. True Yang Sword Dao was masculine and strong, while Rakshasa Sword Dao was cold and murderous. The two of them were at odds with each other. Behind Jing Yang was a ball of sun, while behind Luo Fei was a dark shadow. True Yang Sword Dao, a gathering yang break. Rakshasa Sword Dao, Rakshasa lifeless. Luo Fei was sent flying, and Jing Yang's head flew up. Fifth battle of the 10th round. Lai Shan Swordmaster Lai Shan Hu vs. Vast Swordmaster Su Haosha. Mountain Sword Dao vs. Vast Sword Dao. Mountain Sword Dao, fall of heaven and earth. Vast Sword Dao, boundless momentum. Under the momentum, the mountain collapsed, and Lai Shan who was sent flying. Blood spurted into the sky. Su Haosha slashed at the air, and Lai Shan whose body was cut in half. The 10th round ended. Could be said that Su Haosha won the most easily among the top 10 sword venerables. Every battle was very exciting. Chu Mu did not have the time to comprehend, and could only remember every battle and slowly think about it later. Su Haosha's strength. Thinking about it, Chu Mu's heart trembled slightly. Lai Shan who was already very strong. Chu Mu, who had experienced it personally, was very clear. However, Su Haosha was stronger, and not just by a little bit. It seems that Su Haosha might be the strongest among the top 10 sword venerables. There were 5 people in the 11th round, Wan Qingxian, Ji Qingyu, Feng Wujin, Luo Fei, and Su Haosha. Wan Qingxian vs. Luo Fei. Flying Celestial Sword Dao vs. Rakshasa Sword Dao. Flying Celestial Sword Dao, a heavenly flying celestial. Rakshasa Sword Dao, a no life in Rakshasa. A white figure was like a flying celestial, and a black figure was Rakshasa. Flying Celestial vs. Rakshasa, life and death were decided by one sword. Dao was 1 foot tall, while the devil was 10 feet tall. Flying Celestial was defeated, Rakshasa won. The second battle of the 11th round, Ji Qingyu vs. Feng Wujin. Jade Sword Dao vs. Heaven Sealing Sword Dao. As soon as the sword was drawn, Feng Wujin used Seal of Heaven and Earth to seal the Jade Sword Dao. Both parties could not use Sword Dao. Even if they could not use Sword Dao, Ji Qingyu's sword could cut through gold and jade. It was extremely sharp, and every sword seemed to cut through the void. Feng Wujin's sword was also very strong, but it was relatively peaceful. After a fierce battle, Ji Qingyu won in the end. Su Haosha lost. There were 3 people in the 12th round: Luo Fei, Ji Qingyu, and Su Haosha. The 12th round was a little different. The first battle, Luo Fei vs. Ji Qingyu. Ji Qingyu won. The second battle, Luo Fei vs. Su Haosha. Su Haosha won. Luo Fei lost 2 battles in a row and was eliminated. Only Ji Qingyu and Su Haosha were left. The battle between the 2 strongest. Ji Qingyu vs. Su Haosha. I wonder who is stronger. It's hard to say. We will only know after this battle. Until now, Ji Qingyu and Su Haosha had not been injured even when facing opponents in the top 10 of Sword Saint. Therefore, it was hard to tell who was stronger just by looking at the surface. On the Myriad battle platform, Ji Qingyu and Su Haosha faced each other from a distance. Use your secret technique and fight with all your strength, Ji Qingyu said to Su Haosha. All right. Su Haosha looked at Ji Qingyu deeply and nodded. Golden Jade Mysterious Body. Ji Qingyu let out a low roar and activated his secret technique. The color of gold and jade seemed to surge out from his body, covering his entire body in an instant. His entire body looked as if it was made of gold and jade, exuding an astonishing sharpness that could cut through everything in the world. Boundless, limitless. Su Haosha also used his secret technique. A boundless aura was emitted from his body, revolving around him without dissipating. In an instant, Su Haosha's body seemed to expand endlessly, giving off a majestic and boundless feeling. Their secret techniques were not ordinary secret techniques, but secret techniques of Sword Dao. They were secret techniques that came with the Sword Dao that they had inherited. Non-sword secret techniques could increase one's strength, but they could not increase the power of the Sword Dao. Once the Sword Dao was used, the secret technique would be useless. As for sword secret techniques, they originated from the Sword Dao that they had inherited. They could increase the power of the Sword Dao that they had inherited. It was extremely terrifying. Of course, not all Sword Dao had secret techniques of Sword Dao. Coincidentally, Ji Qingyu and Su Haosha both had them. Under the secret technique of Sword Dao, their strength would increase exponentially. The power of their Sword Dao would also increase exponentially. Fight. Neither of them dared to underestimate the other. Therefore, they did not use their strongest sword skills at the start. They had to use it to determine the victor. Sword techniques clashed, ordinary sword techniques clashed, and their silhouettes flickered. The entire Myriad battle platform was filled with their silhouettes as they clashed. Kill, kill, kill. Every sword was a sure kill sword. They only wanted to kill the other party. Seizing the opportunity, Ji Qingyu used the Jade Sword Dao, cutting gold and breaking jade. Su Haosha smiled. This was a weak flaw that he had purposely revealed. Ji Qingyu had fallen for it. Boundless Sword Dao, a boundless momentum. A sword past, boundless momentum. I am invincible. Ji Qingyu is dead. Su Haosha won and became the first in the 3rd stage of the Unparalleled Sword Supreme Gathering. The glory of unparalleled combat strength was taken by Su Haosha. At this point, the unparalleled sword supreme gathering had ended. The final result was that Chu Mu obtained the glory of unparalleled sword skills and comprehension, while Su Haosha obtained the glory of unparalleled combat strength. It was over. The first unparalleled sword supreme gathering had ended, leaving behind countless discussions and endless aftertaste. You have one day to rest. Tomorrow afternoon, someone will bring you into the 100 Saints Alliance's main hall. The Sword Saint on the myriad battle platform swept his gaze across the 10,000 sword venerables and said faintly. The sword venerables' hearts trembled. They felt that perhaps the true purpose of the 100 Saints Alliance's unparalleled Sword Supreme Gathering was about to surface. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 622. Tomorrow, we will know the purpose of the 100 Saints Alliance's unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly. Inside the Sword Tower, Chu Mu stood next to the window on the 3rd floor and looked at the night sky outside. The sky was filled with stars as he silently spoke. Chu Mu was not excited about obtaining the glory of unparalleled swordsmanship and unparalleled comprehension. It was natural. Being defeated by Lai Shanhu meant that he had no chance to obtain the glory of unparalleled combat prowess, but it also did not make Chu Mu depressed because it was also inevitable. It all came down to his own strength, which was not strong enough. After standing for a while, Chu Mu withdrew his gaze and sat down on the futon in the middle. He closed his eyes and expelled all kinds of distracting thoughts from his mind, recalling every battle in the 3rd stage of the unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly. Integration, thinking, comprehension, and absorption. Time passed unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, a ray of light shone in from outside the window and fell on Chu Mu's face, waking Chu Mu up. Time's up. Chu Mu got up, went downstairs, and walked out of the sword tower. At the same time, sword venerables also came out from the other sword towers. When they saw Chu Mu, they nodded to greet him, and Chu Mu also smiled and nodded in response. At this time, a figure came from afar like a gust of wind. It was one of the sword of Gojoseon of the 100 Saints Alliance. Everyone, follow me, the sword of Gojoseon said with a calm gaze. He glanced at them and then turned to leave. The 100 Saints Palace was the main hall of the 100 Saints Alliance. It was incomparably vast and majestic. Even experts like the sword of Gojoseon would feel small when standing in it. It was a natural gap that could not be bridged. The 100 Saints Hall was the place where the sword saints of the 100 Saints Alliance usually gathered. Great care had been put into its construction, and the materials used were all of the best quality on the ancient sword continent. Coupled with the fact that the person who constructed it had a profound cultivation and extraordinary skill, and had infused his own comprehension into it, the 100 Saints Hall possessed a unique aura. In addition, the sword saints often gathered here. Their auras spread out and constantly affected the surroundings. Although it was slight, it had settled down over thousands or even tens of thousands of years, causing the power of the hall to become even stronger. Only sword saints could remain indifferent in the 100 Saints Hall. Even with Chu Mu's temperament at this moment, he could not help but feel his own insignificance and inferiority. Sword Venerable, who had a weaker will, even felt his legs go soft and almost fell to the ground. However, to be able to stand out among so many sword venerables, he was not weak at all. He could still hold on. Fortunately, the aura of the 100 Saints Hall was not intentionally targeted. As time passed, everyone gradually adapted. Although it was still very heavy, it was no longer as uncomfortable. After leading the way, the sword of Gojoseon entered the 100 Saints Hall. He had Chu Mu and the 10,000 sword venerables wait here. He then turned and left the 100 Saints Hall. Time slowly passed. The 10,000 sword venerables stood there in an extremely orderly manner. No one spoke. It was as if there was a voice in their hearts telling them to remain silent. They were afraid that if they spoke, they would break the silence. The roof of the 100 Saints' Hall was very, very high. It was several hundred meters tall, and the hall was very, very wide as well. Chu Mu and the others only occupied a small part of it. There were 100 chairs in the surroundings. Each chair was 10 meters from the ground, and the back of each chair was also 10 meters tall. There were all sorts of inscriptions on the backs of the chairs, and each chair was different. The inscriptions seemed to contain boundless mysteries. Chu Mu only glanced at them for less than 3 breaths before he had to withdraw his gaze. Otherwise, if he continued to look at them, he would feel dizzy and extremely uncomfortable. If I can comprehend it, it might be helpful in increasing my strength, Chen Feng thought to himself. Suddenly, a voice seemed to ring out. A strong presence appeared in the 100 Saints' Hall, attracting the attention of the 10,000 sword venerables. They all looked at one of the 100 chairs. At some point, a figure had appeared on that chair. He sat there as if he had existed since ancient times. The first sword saint of the 100 Saints Alliance had appeared. Next, the second and third sword saints appeared on the other chairs. No matter how they appeared, once they appeared, they gave Chu Mu and the 10,000 sword venerables the feeling that these sword saints had been sitting on the chairs for a very long time. It was just that they had not noticed them earlier. Soon, a total of 83 sword saints appeared on the 100 chairs. The other 17 chairs were empty for some reason. However, 83 of the 100 ancient sword saints of the 100 Saints Alliance were present. It was enough to show how much importance the 100 Saints Alliance placed on this matter. You must have questions in your hearts. Why is the unparalleled sword venerables gathering held? Said one of the sword saints. His voice reverberated throughout the 100 Saints' Hall, as if it was branded into everyone's hearts. Do you know the mysteries of this vast world? It was another question, but no one could answer because they did not know the answer. Do you know that the ancient sword continent you are in is only one of the worlds in this vast world? Said the sword saint. The 10,000 sword venerables were shocked. Their hearts trembled as if they had been struck. The ancient sword continent, one of the worlds? What did that mean? Outside of the ancient sword continent, there are other existences similar to the ancient sword continent. Above these worlds, there is an even higher world. The sword saint's words were full of secrets. They were being revealed layer by layer to the 10,000 sword venerables. It was as if they had uncovered the truth of a world. Their hearts beat wildly, and their eyes widened in shock. Only Chu Mu's expression returned to indifference after the initial shock. It was not difficult to understand. The people of the ancient sword continent were born and raised there. Their understanding of the world was limited to the ancient sword continent. They also thought that the ancient sword continent was the only one that existed. Chu Mu's soul came from Earth. In that world, other than Earth, there were other planets. Although they had yet to discover life forms on other planets, the universe was so vast and there were so many planets and galaxies. The number of planets that humans had explored so far was less than 10. Compared to the entire universe, it was like a drop in the ocean. Planets with intelligent life forms like humans definitely existed, just that they had yet to be discovered. Therefore, when he heard the sword saint's words, the so-called secret was nothing in Chu Mu's eyes. However, Chu Mu's indifference was different in the eyes of the other sword saints. They all felt that Chu Mu's will was frighteningly firm. Even these sword saints were very surprised when they first learned this secret. It took them a while to calm down. They could not compare with Chu Mu. Unconsciously, they had a higher opinion of Chu Mu. A long time ago, I don't even know how many years ago, there was only one world in the world called the ancient immemorial world. There was a catastrophe and countless lives were wiped out. The edge of the ancient immemorial world was shattered into countless pieces. The 9 larger pieces of the ancient immemorial world underwent many years of changes and formed a new world. One of them is the ancient sword continent under our feet. The sword saint said. His solemn voice was awe-inspiring. Chumu was also slightly surprised. It turned out that this was the origin of the ancient Sword Continent. The other 9 worlds are called the Sky Sword Continent, the Divine Sword Continent, the Demon Sword Continent, the Blood Sword Continent, the Proud Sword Continent, the Thousand Sword Continent, the Swordless Continent, and the Demon Sword Continent. Among the 9 worlds, the ancient Sword Continent is ranked 6th in terms of overall strength. 6th. Everyone's heart trembled. There are some things that you are not strong enough to know. You only need to understand that this world is not as simple as you see it. The Sword Saint said faintly. Originally, the connection between these 9 worlds and the ancient world was cut off, but a few years ago, the Heaven Wasteland Palace appeared. The Heaven Wasteland beasts left the ancient Sword Continent and re-established the connection between the ancient Sword Continent and the ancient world. The same thing happened to the other 8 continents, and they re-established the connection with the ancient world. No one spoke, waiting for the Sword Saint to continue. Only Chumu's thoughts were complicated. It turned out that it was because of the Heaven Wasteland Palace. It seemed that the Heaven Wasteland sword token that he obtained came from the ancient world. In that case, other than the ancient Sword Continent, the other 8 continents also had the Heaven Wasteland Palace and the Heaven Wasteland sword token. Since that was the case, there should be people who obtained the cultivation method from it. Maybe they were the same as him. The Heaven Wasteland sword physique and the Heaven Wasteland sword scripture. It was very likely that other than him, there were 8 other people who had it. Thinking of this, Chumu's eyes could not help but burst out with a bright light. By now, you should understand that the purpose of the Unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly is to select you as the first batch to enter the ancient world. The Sword Saint said, "Enter the ancient world." Every Sword Venerable's heart was trembling. Originally, they did not know about the existence of the ancient world, so they did not have any thoughts about it. But now they knew that the ancient world was an extremely ancient world, a world that was even older and more powerful than the ancient Sword Continent. It could be said that it was the center of everything many years ago. The ancient world is different from our ancient Sword Continent. There are countless experts. Even if the swordsmen of the 9 continents join forces, they still can't compare to the ancient world. The Sword Saint said faintly, "Our ancient Sword Continent will have 10,000 Sword Venerables as the first batch to enter the ancient world. The other 8 continents will also have 10,000 Sword Venerables as the first batch to enter the ancient world, just like you all. However, you all have the right to choose. Withdraw and give the quota to others, but part of your memories must be sealed." None of the Sword Venerables withdrew. It had nothing to do with the sealing of their memories, but the thoughts in their hearts. The ancient world was a gathering place for truly powerful swordsmen. There were countless geniuses and experts. That kind of world was what swordsmen who wanted to become truly strong and pursue the sword Tao yearned for. How could they miss such an opportunity? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 623. His figure shot through the air like an arrow. In the blink of an eye, he crossed over 1,000 meters. Only after a few breaths did a powerful and ear-piercing sound of breaking wind resound. He whistled and tore through the air, leaving behind afterimages as he slowly dissipated. It was Chumu. He was leaving the 100 Saints Mountain Chumu. The immemorial world was a world that countless people yearned to enter. It was an ancient world with countless experts. The 10,000 sword sovereigns would become the first batch to enter the immemorial world. This was an opportunity. Actually, when these 10,000 sword sovereigns stood out from the hundreds of thousands of other sword sovereigns, they were already qualified to be the first batch to enter the immemorial world. As for the last 3 stages, that was the method that the Sword Saints of the 100 Saints Alliance came up with. They felt that firstly, they wanted to see if there were any juniors worthy of their attention among the 10,000 sword sovereigns. Secondly, since they were going to hold the immemorial world meeting, they had to hold it properly and not skimp on it. As a result, when the 3 stages of the meeting began, the 100 Saints Alliance had already ordered all the branch halls on the ancient Sword Continent to spread the news of the meeting. In a short time, the news had spread across the entire ancient Sword Continent. It could be said that apart from some very remote places, almost everyone knew about the meeting. In the end, there were no substantial rewards. Sword Saints only offered to take in disciples. Many sword sovereigns were taken in as disciples, but Chu Mu refused. He wanted to walk the path of creating his own way of the sword. If he wanted to become a disciple, he could have directly inherited the way of the sword and bloodline of the Sky Dragon Sword Saint. There was no need to wait until now. Even though Chu Mu refused to become a disciple, there were still a few sword saints who found him very pleasing to the eye. They gave him some things. Some things were useful to Chu Mu, while others were not. However, they were still useful to him. Actually, to Chu Mu, it did not matter whether there were rewards or not. After carefully pondering over the many battles on the myriad battle platform, Chu Mu's strength could increase further in a short time. He would become even more powerful. It wasn't so easy to enter the supreme ancient immortal realms. One had to establish a connection with the supreme ancient immortal realms and construct a stable passageway before they could enter. They still had to wait for a year. In other words, Chu Mu and the other 10,000 sword venerables still had to wait for a year before they could enter the immemorial world. During this year, they could do whatever they wanted. They could stay in the sword tower of the 100 Saints Mountain, return to their sects, or go anywhere to train. They just had to return to the 100 Saints Alliance within the specified time. Chu Mu chose to leave the 100 Saints Mountain. He planned to make a trip back to the Eastern Sword Domain. Maybe, after entering the Supreme Ancient World, it would be very difficult for him to return. Even if he could return, who knew how many years it would take? Therefore, this trip back could be considered as a farewell. Perhaps they would never meet again. Now, Chu Mu's speed was unbelievably fast. Even without using the profound of space, he only used a short month to fly to the Bright Connection River. Without stopping, he flew directly to the other side of the Tongming River. On the Tongming River, a huge ship carried many people, braving the wind and waves. Under the warm sunlight, many people were either sitting or standing on the deck. At this moment, a figure flashed across the sky above the ship. It was like a stream of light, disappearing in a flash. Who is that? How could he cross the Tongming River like that? Such fast speed. I'm afraid he's not an ordinary Origin Realm swordsman. Maybe he's a sword venerable. I wonder if he's one of the 10,000 sword venerables in the unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly? How is that possible? When the unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly ended, the 100 Saints Alliance also let the various sub-palaces spread the results of the assembly. Apart from the secrets of the Supreme Ancient World, the 10,000 Sword Venerables in the unparalleled Sword Venerable Assembly were announced. Moreover, the top 10 Sword Venerables were also announced. Afterward, the 3 winners of the Unparalleled Glory were also announced. This could be divided into 3 levels. First, the 10,000 Sword Venerables in the Unparalleled Glory. After all, they stood out from hundreds of thousands of Sword Venerables and were considered very powerful. Second, the top 10 Sword Venerables. They were the 10 most powerful Sword Venerables out of hundreds of thousands of Sword Venerables. They could also be the 10 most powerful Sword Venerables in the entire ancient Sword Continent. Third, the 3 winners of the Unparalleled Glory received even more attention than the top 10 Sword Venerables. Because of this, Chu Mu and Su Haosha's names were the most resounding among all the Sword Saints. This was because Chu Mu had obtained 2 unparalleled honors, while Su Haosha had only obtained 1 unparalleled honor. However, he was number 1 in the Sword Saint top 10 experts, and was also the strongest of the 10,000 finalists. He was even considered the number 1 Sword Saint in the ancient Sword Continent. Great Koan Dynasty, Mizar City. The Chu clan was originally a small clan. They didn't have any powerful experts and their foundation wasn't deep enough. They couldn't be compared to the other clans. Even after a few years of development and rapid expansion of their strength, the Chu clan was only an ordinary clan in the entire Great Koan Dynasty. However, at this moment, the Chu clan was incomparably lively. Many people of noble status arrived one after another. No matter how noble their status was, no matter how powerful they were, their attitude became gentle and humble when they arrived at the Chu clan. The people of the Chu clan understood that this kind of humility wasn't targeted at them. It was because of Chu Mu's face. Even though Chu Mu wasn't here. However, the Eastern Sword Domain's Eastern Sage Sub-Hall had already spread the news. All the Sword Venerables who participated in the Unparalleled Sword Venerables Assembly and made it to the finals would receive the protection of the 100 Saints Alliance. In other words, Chu Mu's Chu clan would receive the protection of the 100 Saints Alliance. The 100 Saints Alliance was the strongest existence in the entire ancient Sword continent. It was a colossus that even the combined might of the 10 great sword sects couldn't compare to. With the protection of the 100 Saints Alliance, who could touch the Chu clan in the ancient Sword continent? As long as you were still in the ancient Sword continent, you wouldn't be able to escape the eyes of the 100 Saints Alliance. No matter what your identity was, touching the Chu clan was equivalent to becoming an enemy of the 100 Saints Alliance. The final result would be being uprooted. Who would be so foolish to touch a clan that wasn't that strong? Not to mention, this clan would have boundless potential because of Chu Mu. Therefore, in the Great Koan Dynasty, many clans chose to befriend them. Not only the clans, those sword sects, regardless of whether they were low grade, middle grade or high grade, all expressed their sincerity and sent gifts one after another. The royal family of the Great Koan Dynasty also sent gifts. Without exception, the 4 great sword sects also sent gifts. For half a month, the Chu clan kept receiving gifts and inviting guests. The entire Kaiyang city was unprecedentedly lively. Everyone in the Chu clan was busy for half a month. As a vassal of the Chu clan, the Lin clan also did their best to help. There were also many people in Kaiyang city who came to help. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to cope. Even so, after half a month, everyone was about to die from exhaustion. Finally, they had time to rest and catch their breath. Even though they were about to die from exhaustion, the Chu clan was incomparably happy. This was because this was a good thing. This was the glory of the Chu clan. This supreme glory was brought by Chu Mu and had already been recorded in the Chu clan's genealogy. The Chu clan would be revitalized because of Chu Mu. It would be great if Ah Mu came back. Chu Tian sat lazily in the courtyard, half lying down and looking at the sky as he muttered to himself. Not far away there was a beautiful young woman, a husband and wife who looked to be in their 40s, and a bouncing child. Chu Tian's voice wasn't loud, but everyone was a swordsman and had a certain level of strength. Naturally, they could hear him. The beautiful young woman revealed a curious expression because she had never seen Chu Mu before. As for the husband and wife, they were both gratified, expectant, and sad. It was a very complicated expression. The middle-aged man reached out and patted the woman's shoulder. He sighed and didn't say anything. Compared to the Chu clan, many swordsmen in the Eastern Sword domain were incomparably excited and emotional. There were many sword venerables in the ancient Sword continent. The Eastern Sword domain had a total of more than 10 people in the top 10,000. More importantly, Chu Mu had obtained 2 supreme glories. One had to know that there were only 3. To the Eastern Sword domain, Chu Mu came from the Great Koan Dynasty. To the Great Koan Dynasty, Chu Mu was a descendant of the Chu clan. However, to the entire ancient Sword continent, Chu Mu came from the Eastern Sword domain. His glories were also the glories of the Eastern Sword domain. Chu Mu wasn't clear about this, nor did he try to understand it, because at this moment, he had already crossed the Bright Connection River. He didn't stop for even a second and quickly flew in the direction of the great Koan dynasty. There had never been such a moment where the desire to return home was so strong. His entire heart was trembling, and so was his soul. He had never experienced such a feeling before. His speed was extremely fast as he streaked across the sky. Often, when people saw him, Chu Mu's figure was already thousands of meters away, turning into a small black dot and disappearing. His speed shocked too many people. After all, the Eastern Sword Domain wasn't the Central Sword Domain. There were very few Sword Venerable level experts. For example, in the Eastern, Southern, Western and Northern Sword Domains, once the swordsman's strength reached the Origin Realm, most of them would leave and enter the Central Sword Domain to train for 3 to 5 years or more. If they didn't achieve anything, they would leave and return to their original Sword Domain. Of course, there were also some who returned for a short period of time. No matter what, places like the Eastern Sword Domain weren't suitable for Sword Venerables to cultivate. Therefore, very few Sword Venerables would stay there. Chu Mu's speed was too fast. It was so fast that many Sword Venerables couldn't match him. However, no one would have thought that it was Chu Mu. If they knew that it was Chu Mu, who knew how excited they would be? They might even chase after him. In the past, Chu Mu felt that the Eastern Sword Domain was very big. But now, the Eastern Sword Domain wasn't big at all. With his speed, mountains, rivers and lakes were all crossed and left behind. In just a few days, Chu Mu had entered the great Koan dynasty. As he flew, the outline of Kaiyang City had already appeared in Chu Mu's eyes. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:24. A wanderer returning to his home was even more timid. In the sky above Kaiyang City, Chu Mu's body stopped in midair. His eyes trembled slightly. There was an indescribable excitement in his heart, and a strange feeling reverberated in his chest. At this moment, Chu Mu's emotions were extremely complicated. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. It was a very long breath. As he exhaled the turbid air, Chu Mu's heart gradually calmed down, and his eyes returned to normal. Descending from the sky and landing outside Kaiyang City, he attracted a lot of attention. However, after so many years, not many people recognized Chu Mu. It's even more bustling than before. Slowing down, Chu Mu walked into Kaiyang City. Looking around, Chu Mu saw people coming and going. The flow of people was several times more than what he remembered. This made Kaiyang City, which was not big to begin with, seem a little crowded. Especially since the banquet held by the Chu clan in half a month had just ended. Many people from other places had yet to leave Kaiyang City, causing the population of Kaiyang City to increase. On the streets, it was a scene of people squeezing together like a bustling market. Walking into the crowd, Chu Mu's figure was very agile. Like a fish swimming between reefs, he was not obstructed in the slightest. Even though the flow of people was like an unending torrent, it still did not affect Chu Mu in the slightest. The Chu family residence was in Kaiyang City. Chu Mu, on the other hand, wasn't in a hurry to go back. He slowly walked through the crowd and watched the street vendors haggle. He felt the liveliness and ordinariness of a normal person. Chu Mu was like an outsider who had entered this place. As he walked, the aura on his body became more and more ordinary. He gradually blended into the crowd, as if he had become a part of Kaiyang City. Unknowingly, Chu Mu had walked into the Chu clan's residence area. Unlike the packed streets, there was not a single person in the 10,000-meter radius around the Chu clan's residence. This wasn't done intentionally by the Chu clan. Instead, it was done out of respect for the Chu clan. They wanted the Chu clan to be a peaceful place. The Chu clan mansion had clearly been expanded. It was at least 2 or 3 times larger than before. Chu Mu slowly walked towards the main entrance of the Chu clan mansion. At the main entrance, 2 swordsmen in their 30s stood on either side of him. Their bodies were as straight as swords, and their auras were condensed. Their eyes were sharp, and the auras they exuded let Chu Mu know that they were both in the Qi transformation realm. It seems that the Chu clan has become much stronger than before, Chu Mu thought to himself. He felt a trace of joy in his heart because the Chu clan was his family. It was a good thing that the Chu clan was powerful. In the past, the Chu clan only had Chu Dongxiong, who was a Qi transformation realm swordsman. But now, even the swordsmen guarding the gate were at the beginning of the Qi transformation realm. This was enough to show that the Chu clan had given birth to even more Qi transformation realm swordsmen. This is the Chu clan mansion. May I ask what advice you have for us? One of the two swordsmen took a step forward and saluted with his sword. His tone was neither servile nor overbearing as he asked. I am Chu Mu. Chu Mu nodded slightly and said, Chu. The two swordsmen were startled. For a moment they didn't react. When they looked at Chu Mu again, their expressions changed greatly. Excitement overflowed from the bottom of their hearts. Yes, that's right. The person in front of them was Chu Mu. He was the Chu Mu who was crowned with infinite glory by the Chu clan. After so many years, his appearance hadn't changed much compared to before. It was just that they never thought that Chu Mu would return, so they didn't think in that direction. Now that they heard Chu Mu announce his name and carefully looked at Chu Mu's appearance, their bodies trembled with excitement. Young master, please come in. The two swordsmen hurriedly opened the door. Their bodies were trembling, and even their voices were trembling. Then they shouted at the top of their lungs, Young master is back. Young master Chu Mu is back. Their voices contained sword energy. It was like the roar of thunder, rolling and shaking the entire Chu clan mansion. In an instant, the Chu clan mansion fell into a strange silence. Because of this news, they couldn't react for a moment. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, excited shouts sounded. Then, there was the sound of wind breaking. One figure after another flew out of the pavilions and rushed towards the Chu clan mansion's main hall. At this time, Chu Mu was walking into the Chu clan mansion. He walked into the Chu clan mansion's front yard. The front yard of the Chu clan mansion was 2 to 3 times bigger than before. Chu Mu's footsteps stopped, because he saw that there were many people standing outside the Chu clan mansion's main hall. Some of their eyes were filled with excitement, while others were filled with curiosity and respect. In a sense, these people were his family. Chu Mu's gaze swept across and landed on the faces of a couple. His calm heart couldn't help but ripple. Once again, he became excited. However, he subconsciously controlled himself and didn't show it. Perhaps, he didn't want others to see him lose his cool. Mu. The woman's eyes were filled with tears. Her voice trembled with excitement. Step by step, she walked out of the crowd. She stretched out her hand and gently stroked Chu Mu's cheek. That gaze made Chu Mu's heart ache. The middle-aged man also walked over with large stride. He didn't say anything. His hand heavily patted Chu Mu's shoulder as if it weighed thousands of pounds. His gaze conveyed everything. Chu Tian also walked over with large strides. He stood beside Chu Mu and placed his hand on Chu Mu's other shoulder. On his face, there was a sincere smile that came from the bottom of his heart. He was so happy. Within the crowd, the old Chu Dongxiong, as well as all of the direct descendants of the Chu family and so on, did not move. No one went to disturb the 4 of them. They only watched like that because the 4 of them were a family. They were a small family within the entire Chu family. After a while, Chu Xingyun calmed down his excitement. He knew that although Chu Mu was his son, he was also the Chu clan's back. He was the Chu clan's glory. At this time, there were many people waiting for Chu Mu. Good, good, good. Chu Dangxiong's big hand fell on Chu Mu's shoulder and he was greatly comforted. His voice reverberated throughout the area like a ferocious tiger's roar. Chu Mu's eyes shined brightly. Chu Mu discovered that Chu Dangxiong's cultivation had reached the low level of the Qi high realm. Thinking about it, although Chu Dongxiong's talent wasn't that great, it wasn't bad either. With the pills and scrolls that Chu Mu brought back, he would be able to increase his cultivation over a long period of time. Besides Chu Dongxiong, Chu Mu also noticed that there were other Qi High Realm sword warriors in the Chu clan. Although they were only at the initial Qi High Realm, they were above Chu Dongxiong in terms of battle power. He was Chu He. Chu He's talent was considered good in the Great Kuan dynasty. He had comprehended the concept of water. Now that he had reached the Qi High Realm, he left the Great Kuan Sword Palace and returned to the Chu clan. He was the new leader of the Chu clan. As for his father, he retired and focused on his cultivation. For a clan to be strong, other than wealth, the most important thing was martial power. Only when there were more powerful sword warriors in the clan could they protect the clan's foundation. Only then could they intimidate others and allow the clan to grow steadily. Like Chu Xingyun and his brothers, they had all reached the peak of the Qi transformation realm. Compared to before, they had improved by many times. Chu Mu also discovered that his older brother, Chu Tian, who was at the peak of the Qi transformation realm, had also left the Great Kuan Sword Mansion and returned to the Chu family. He had even married a virtuous wife and had a cute and naughty son. In the past, this was something that he could not imagine. Although marrying and having children was very normal for ordinary people, it was relatively rare for swordsmen. Unless swordsmen felt that it was difficult for them to improve further, or if there was some special reason, they would continue to travel and gain experience. Having a family would become a kind of concern. Of course, this wasn't absolute. Sometimes, concern was also a motivation. From Chu Mu's point of view, Chu Tian still had potential. However, Chu Tian's choice was his own. Chu Mu wouldn't interfere. He would only be happy for him. Moreover, Chu Mu had returned. There were many cultivation resources in his interspatial ring. It was enough for Chu Tian's strength to improve further. So he's Uncle Chu Mu. He looks so young. The Chu family's younger generation had all grown up listening to Chu Mu's stories. Towards Chu Mu, they had a sense of worship since they were young. They had always hoped to be able to see Chu Mu in person. He was the idol in their hearts, and also the goal that they worked hard for. Now that they had finally seen Chu Mu in person, they discovered that Chu Mu was even younger than they had imagined. He looked even younger than their father. That's because Uncle Chu Mu is very, very powerful. That's why he looks so young. This group of children didn't know how powerful Chu Mu was. They could only use the word very, very powerful to describe him. Chu Mu's return caused the entire Chu clan to be overjoyed. They were very excited. The news of Chu Mu's return was not concealed. It quickly spread throughout Kaiyang City. The outsiders who stayed in Kaiyang City also spread the news. In less than a day, almost everyone in the Great Kuan dynasty knew of Chu Mu's return. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the entire Eastern Sword domain to know of Chu Mu's return. When that time came, it would cause another commotion. However, Chu Mu didn't care about any of this. At this moment, he was enjoying the joy of his family. In the courtyard of the Xingyun courtyard, Chu Xingyun and his wife, Chu Tian and his wife, and Chu Mu were sitting around a table. Chu Tian's wife was called Li Wenxiu. She was from the same family as Li Yunlan. Although she couldn't be considered a great beauty, she was gentle and virtuous. She had an elegant temperament. With a single glance, one could tell that she was from a noble family. She was a good match for Chu Tian. Chu Tian and Li Wenxiu's son was called Chu Jing. It meant that he was upright and upright. This little fellow was almost 2 years old now, and its body was even more robust than other children of the same age. It was currently hiding behind Li Wenxiu and secretly poking its head out. Its pair of black eyes were full of curiosity as it sized up Chu Mu. He had heard of this uncle many times. This was his first time seeing him, so he was filled with curiosity. Zheng is a little shy. Uncle, please don't blame him. Li Wenxiu rubbed Chu Mu's little head and smiled at him. Chu Mu faintly smiled. How could he be offended? Instead, he used a gentle gaze to look at Chu Jing. He then clenched his hand into a fist and extended it. Slowly opening it, a red and blue interweaving lotus slowly blossomed. It was vivid and lifelike, gorgeous and enchanting. It caused Chu Jing's eyes to light up, and he excitedly ran out from behind Li Wenxiu. His large black eyes stared at Chu Mu's hand. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 625. When they found out that Chu Mu would be staying in the Chu clan for at least half a year, Chu Xingyun and his wife were overjoyed. They thought that Chu Mu would leave as soon as possible, just like before. Although half a year wasn't a long time, it was enough. Chu Mu took some time to visit the Qinfeng sword sect. With his cultivation, he could reach there in just 2 hours. The sect master of the Qinfeng sword sect was now Luo Yufeng. His senior brother chatted with him, and also met the elders of other sword sects, especially the enforcement elder and the Lingfeng sect master. After leaving some cultivation resources to strengthen the Qinfeng sword sect, Chu Mu returned to the Chu clan. Chu Mu spent his days cultivating and comprehending. Then, he would take some time to play with his nephew. With all kinds of mysterious methods, his nephew would stick to Chu Mu all day long. Chu Mu also took the opportunity to check on Chu Jing's talent. He had a cultivation talent of the 6th grade, which was considered pretty good in the Great Koan dynasty. It indicated that he had the potential to reach the origin realm. Of course, that was under the condition that he had sufficient cultivation resources. Chu Mu was still young and wasn't suitable for cultivation. Chu Mu didn't teach him cultivation either. He only took advantage of the time when he was playing with Chu Jing to use his sword energy and other powers to comb through Chu Jing's body and meridians. Bit by bit, it nourished and gradually strengthened Chu Jing's foundation. In addition, Chu Mu would also take the opportunity of playing to teach Chu Jing the cultivation of basic sword technique. Chu Jing's body was stronger than his peers, and his strength was also more powerful. He was suited to walk the path of tyranny. Therefore, the basic sword techniques that Chu Mu taught Chu Jing were mainly tyrannical, supplemented with finesse and skill. He would make it so that there was finesse in the coarse, and flexibility in the tyrannical, making it even more perfect. One could imagine that if Chu Jing persisted in his cultivation, the Great Koan dynasty would have a new star in the Chu clan. In fact, what Chu Mu didn't know was that his luck was affecting the Chu clan. Chu Mu's luck was undoubtedly stronger than others. Under this influence, the luck of the Chu clan also increased a little. Especially those who were close to Chu Mu, the benefits were even more obvious. Time passed, and the Chu clan faced a matter that could not be considered troublesome. Someone came to ask to be his disciple. The apprentices were around 10 years old, and there were also teenagers who came from the 10 great dynasties of the Eastern Sword domain. Their master was naturally Chu Mu. When Chu Mu found out about this, he immediately jumped in fright when he looked outside the Chu clan's mansion. He saw at least several thousand people kneeling in the open space outside the Chu clan's mansion. Moreover, there were still people rushing over. "Ah Mu, I think you should take in a disciple." In the Xingyun courtyard, Chu Tian laughed. Accept a disciple? Chu Mu was stunned. He had never considered this because he had always felt that he was not strong enough and had not gone far enough. He simply did not have the time to accept any disciples. One had to know that taking in a disciple was not a child's play. After taking in a disciple, there would be an invisible connection between them. For various reasons, Chu Mu did not want to take in a disciple. According to his thinking, even if he wanted to take in a disciple, at the very least, he would have to wait until his path of swordsmanship reached a certain level. Currently, he was just at the beginning. But now, He did not have the time to think about it because he was about to leave the ancient sword continent and go to the immemorial world. After that, he did not know if he would return. If I take in a disciple and teach them, it will be equivalent to leaving a foundation in the ancient sword continent. They can also help the Chu clan a little, Chu Mu thought. No matter how strong a clan was, there would be a day when it would decline. The current Chu clan was not strong enough. They were gradually becoming stronger, and one day they would become very strong. But sometimes the world was unpredictable. Fine. Let's see if there is anyone among these people who can catch my eye, Chu Mu thought. Since he wanted to take in a disciple, Chu Mu would not act rashly. Instead, he had the Chu clan announce that those who wanted to take him as their master could not be older than 15. They had to pass the test outside the Chu clan within 3 months. Only then would they have a chance. As for the content of the test, those who participated in the test naturally knew. As for those who were surrounding the Chu clan's residence, they had to leave as soon as possible so that the Chu clan wouldn't be inconvenienced. Once the news was released, it spread throughout the eastern sword region in a short span of a day, causing a great commotion. Immediately, many people brought their outstanding juniors with them and hurried to the Kuan dynasty's Kaiyang city. Kaiyang city became the center of attention once again. For this, the great Kuan dynasty's royal family gave the order to expand Kaiyang city. Everyone started work and a large amount of resources were sent over. All eyes were on it. 3 days later, Chu Mu also finished setting the test. It was divided into 3 stages. The first stage tested the foundation of swordsmanship. Whether it was Chu Mu's background or his experiences over the years, they all required his guidance. The importance of swordsmanship was indispensable, and it had to be cultivated to a high level. Perhaps for those young people, their basic swordsmanship could not reach that level. Chu Mu would not ask them to reach that level now. However, what he wanted to test was the foundation of their basic swordsmanship, the degree of their mastery and understanding of swordsmanship, and so on. The second stage tested their comprehension. They had to comprehend a sword mark that he casually left behind within a set time. If they could comprehend it completely, they would naturally pass. The third stage tested one's combat ability. No matter how deep one's cultivation base was, no matter how powerful one's sword techniques were, they were all empty. Only by fully unleashing one's own advantages and using one's heart's desire to transform it into true combat strength, using the smallest price to defeat stronger opponents, was the true path of the king. When those youths who were already in Mizar city found out that the test had begun, they all rushed over to participate in the test. Unfortunately, not a single one of them was able to enter the third stage. At most, they would be eliminated in the second stage. Even if they were filled with unwillingness, there was nothing they could do. Cause trouble? They were not that stupid. That would be digging their own grave. There were people rushing to Kaiyang city continuously. They immediately went to the 3 stages set up by the Chu clan to participate in the test. However, they were all defeated and left dejectedly. A month later, the expansion of Kaiyang city was completed. The efficiency was shocking. It was enough to show that the great Kuan royal family had put in a lot of effort. The completed expansion of Kaiyang city was 5 times the size of the original city. It could accommodate even more people. Because of Chu Mu and the Chu clan, it could be foreseen that Kaiyang city would become a new city. It would flourish soon. The great Kuan royal family's expansion was firstly to curry favor with Chu Mu. Secondly, it was beneficial to the great Kuan royal family. Chu Mu had set a time limit of 3 months for the test. Now that a month had passed, there were only 2 months left. If they could not find a suitable candidate within the time limit, Chu Mu would rather not accept them. The time he would stay here was destined not to be long. If he did not have enough time, even if he met a disciple that he was satisfied with, he would lack the time to teach and mislead them. Either he did not do it or he did it perfectly. Chu Mu was not anxious at all. As usual, He cultivated and comprehended, played with his nephew. Sometimes, he would also give pointers to the Chu clan's disciples. On the contrary, there were many Chu clan members who were anxious about the matter of recruiting disciples. "Ah Mu, the test you set is too difficult," Chu Tian said with a bitter smile. "It's not difficult," Chu Mu, who was playing with Chu Jing, said with a faint smile. Chu Tian shook his head and didn't say anything else. That was just his words of regret. Whatever Chu Mu did, he wouldn't interfere. After Chu Mu returned and gave him all kinds of pills, Chu Tian's strength had reached the peak of the Qi transformation realm. His foundation was very solid, so using pills to increase his cultivation did not leave any side effects. As for Chu Xingyun, his wife, and his brothers, after half a month of closed-door cultivation, they had all broken through to the Qi High realm. The Chu clan's overall strength had once again increased. In the blink of an eye, another month had passed. The number of youths who participated in the test had reached close to 100,000. There were some who had made it to the third test, but unfortunately, their battle talent was not up to Chu Mu's standard and they were eliminated. One thing worth being happy about was that Chu Mu's cultivation had made a breakthrough in this peaceful environment. He had reached the peak of the origin realm. He then used some time to consolidate his cultivation and consumed the 1,000-year desolation stalactite to increase his cultivation to the peak of the origin realm. Day after day, after the expansion of Kaiyang City, many new houses and streets were built. These new houses were gradually occupied by people, and the new streets were gradually filled with people coming and going. The 3 tests of the Chu clan still had not been passed. Some of the Chu clan members had also tried, but in the end they did not pass either. After experiencing it themselves, they knew how difficult it was. On the last day of the 3rd month, "Ah Mu," Chu Tian's tone was filled with excitement. "I got it, someone passed your 3 tests. Someone passed." Chu Mu, who was playing with his nephew, was slightly surprised. He was the one who set up the 3 tests, so he naturally knew that it was not easy to pass them. He even thought that no one in the younger generation of the Eastern Sword domain would be able to pass them. He didn't expect someone to pass. Chu Mu's curiosity was immediately piqued. "Where is he?" Chu Mu asked. "I've brought him for you." Chu Tian grinned. "Young man, come in." As soon as he finished speaking, a thin figure walked in. Seeing this figure, Chu Mu was slightly startled. Strong, stubborn, persistent, unyielding, suffering, and many other words jumped out in his mind. Seeing this figure, Chu Mu naturally thought of these words, as if they were a description. His clothes were coarse and torn in many places. There were many black marks on his malnourished face, which seemed to be left behind by charcoal. His hair was messy, as if it had not been washed for many days. There was a strange smell on his body, which was the smell of not bathing for a long time. Chu Mu naturally would not reject him because of his appearance. These were only external factors and were not important. His gaze fell on the other's eyes. That pair of eyes were crystal clear, like the water of a clear spring, and contained all kinds of emotions, such as longing, hope, and unyielding. At first sight of this young man, Chu Mu had a good impression of him. As for whether to accept him as a disciple, he still had to consider it. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:26. Chu Mu brought the young man to wash up and change into a clean set of clothes. Then, he brought him to the pavilion in Xingyun Court to meet Chu Mu. As for Chu Jing, he was taken away by his mother, Li Wenxiu. After washing up, the young man's skin was a little rough and bronze. His cheeks were slightly sunken. It was obvious that his life was not going well. He stood in front of Chu Mu and looked at Chu Mu without saying a word. His eyes were filled with curiosity. "What's your name?" Chu Mu asked gently. "Aluan." The young man did not hesitate and gave a short answer. It was obvious that he was not good with words. You don't have a surname? Chu-mu asked again. No. The young man said. Tell me about your background. Chu-mu asked again. Just like that, through the questions and answers, Chu-mu gradually gained a deeper understanding of the young man. Alwan, 14 years old, was from the De Kuan dynasty. He left his parents when he was a baby and was adopted by an old man who sold vegetables for a living. He liked to practice swordsmanship since he was young. However, he did not have money and neither did the old man. When he was 10 years old, the old man used the money he earned from selling vegetables to buy him a book on basic swordsmanship. He also used a piece of bamboo to make a bamboo sword for him as a birthday gift. He did not cultivate qi and only practiced basic swordsmanship. In 4 years, he was able to reach the standard of Chu-mu's assessment and pass the second round. This showed that his comprehension was not weak. The actual combat in the third round also showed the young man's talent in combat. Chu-mu's sword observation technique could observe swords and people. This young man named Alwan was not a scheming person. His heart was unyielding and tenacious. This kind of temperament was to Chu-mu's liking. Chu-mu decided to take the young man as his disciple. From now on, your surname will be Chu. If you see your parents again one day, change back to your surname, Chu-mu said to the young man. The young man's eyes trembled. He had lived a hard life since young and was very independent. He was more sensible than his peers. Therefore, he immediately understood the meaning of Chu-mu's words. Chu Luan greets master. The young man immediately knelt down and kowtowed 3 times. Get up. There are no rules when learning the sword from me. Just follow your heart and have a clear conscience, Chu-mu said with a smile. After that, Chu Luan stayed in the Chu family. The old man who took him in was also brought to the Chu family to enjoy his life. The news of Chu-mu taking in a disciple was spread out. The 3 tests were cancelled. Countless people felt sad and left helplessly. Chu Luan's basic swordsmanship was practiced by himself from a book. He did not receive any guidance from anyone because he did not have the chance. Chu-mu taught his disciples from 2 aspects. The first was the principles, some of which he himself had comprehended about the sword and the principles of being a person. To learn the sword, one must first know how to be a person and have a good character. The second was cultivation, true cultivation. Chu-mu first let Chu Luan practice the basic swordsmanship. After Chu Luan finished, he held his sword and stood there without moving. He waited for Chu-mu to speak. He seemed to be practicing very well. However, in the eyes of Chu-mu, he could see many flaws. Of course, for someone who had only practiced for 4 years and had not received any guidance, Chu Luan was already doing very well. Most swordsmen would not be able to do as well as Chu Luan under such circumstances. You have a certain foundation. Next, it's time to give you guidance, Chu-mu said. As for Chu Luan's cultivation method, it was the mixed yuan art. The name of the mixed yuan art was a little common, but it was not ordinary at all. It was a heaven-level middle-level cultivation method. The sword qi cultivated was very solid. It was twice as pure and dense as swordsmen of the same level. Of course, the cultivation of the mixed yuan art was not that easy. Although Chu Luan's comprehension was not as good as Chu-mu's, it was not bad. Under Chu-mu's guidance, he used 3 days to grasp the basics of the mixed yuan art. He also cultivated a trace of the mixed yuan sword qi and stepped into the first stage of the sword qi art. During this period of time, Chu Dongxiong had found Chu-mu and suggested that since Chu-mu was teaching disciples, shouldn't he also give pointers to the Chu family disciples? Chu-mu thought for a while and decided to use pointers as an excuse to secretly pick out a group of outstanding disciples from the Chu family and train them together to create a sword guard to protect the Chu family's safety. After a few days of selection, 12 people were chosen. The oldest was 20 years old and the youngest was 17. Their talent was not bad. Although they could not be compared to Chu Luan, they could be considered one of the best in Kaiyang City. Chu Mu indeed wanted better candidates, but there was no other way. The current Chu clan was at this level. Among the 12 Chu clan disciples, the highest was at the 10th stage of the Sword Chi realm. The lowest was at the 8th stage of the Sword Chi realm. Chu Mu immediately let them cultivate the Sword Chi art. The Ao Xian scripture. The Ao Xian scripture was another technique that Chu Mu had obtained. It was a low-grade heaven-level technique. Although it was not as good as the mixed yuan art, it was still very good. Chu Mu felt that it was valuable, so he kept it. The Ao Xian scripture was different from the primordial scripture. The sword qi that was cultivated was not as pure and thick as the primordial scripture, but it was very sharp. Moreover, the cultivation speed was several times faster than the primordial scripture. It was not that Chu Mu was reluctant to let these 12 people cultivate the mixed yuan art. The main reason was that they were to be cultivated into a secret force of the Chu clan. They were different from ordinary sword guards. They must have strong battle strength. However, the cultivation speed of the mixed yuan art was too slow. Who knew how many years it would take for them to form a powerful battle strength? The Ao Xian scripture was the best choice. It did not have any special attribute. Anybody could cultivate it. The Ao Xian sword qi that was cultivated was very sharp. Moreover, there was a sword manual, a footwork, and a secret technique. The first part of the sword manual was called the Ao Xian 13 styles. Each style was fiercer than the last. The second part was the 3 Ao Xian sword skills. The footwork was called the Ao Xian ascending heaven step. The secret technique was a secret technique to increase one's strength. It was called the Ao Xian whitehead. It was divided into 3 levels. Cultivating to the 3rd level could increase the power of the Ao Xian sword qi by 2 times. Because of the Ao Xian scripture, this group of sword guards was also named the Ao Xian sword guards by Chu Mu. Time flew by. It had been more than 4 months since Chu Mu returned to the Chu clan. After a month of cultivation, his basic sword arts had improved further. His sword qi cultivation had also reached the 5th level of the sword qi realm. On one hand, his cultivation talent was good, reaching the 5th level. On the other hand, he was very hard-working. He knew that this kind of opportunity did not come easily. On the other hand, Chu Mu had provided him with high-level pills with extremely low side effect. On the other hand, it was the effect of the mixed yuan art. Although the cultivation speed was slower, it had the advantage of having a solid foundation. As for the 12 Ao Xian sword guards, their cultivation had also broken through the sword qi realm and reached the qi transformation realm. They had cultivated a heaven-level lower-level technique. Their sword qi was very terrifying. In the Great Kuan dynasty, most of the swordsmen of the same level could not compete with them. Only a few true geniuses could defeat them. However, this was still not enough. This was only the beginning. Chu Mu did everything he could to train them. In addition to sword qi and sword arts, he also tempered their bodies. He gave them pointers and taught them a sword formation. This sword formation was called sword rain sword formation. It required at least 2 people to set it up. The more people there were, the stronger the sword formation. When the 12 Ao Xian sword guards were proficient in setting up the formation, the strength they could display was very terrifying. In the 5th month since Chu Mu returned to the Chu clan, Chu Mu began to let Chu Luan and the Ao Xian sword guards spar with sword arts. The swords used were wooden swords. The requirement was that they had the same sword qi cultivation. They also protected their vital parts. This was because Chu Mu wanted them to fight with sword arts. They treated each other as if they were mortal enemies and did not hold back. Therefore, injuries were unavoidable. Fortunately, Chu Mu had enough pills. They could recover by the next day and continue to spar. Under this kind of sparring, Chu Luan and the Ao Xian sword guards' sword arts improved rapidly. And Chu Luan also gave Chu Mu an unexpected surprise. When Chu Luan was fighting, Chu Mu noticed that his body's movements were faster than his consciousness. After a few observations, Chu Mu was finally sure that this was the case. But why was this so? Chu Mu was puzzled. Normal people would use their consciousness to control their body. Even if it was an instinct, it was still subconsciously controlled. For Chu Luan, his body's reaction was before his consciousness. It felt as if his body had its own consciousness. Chu Mu searched through the information he had read and finally found an explanation. Sword body. Chu Luan had an innate sword body. Moreover, it was the extremely rare heavenly martial sword body. Heavenly martial sword body, non-elemental, born for battle. This was the introduction of the heavenly martial sword body. It was very simple, but it contained a lot of information. The heavenly martial sword body was not like the wind spirit sword body, gold spirit sword body, etc. It had no elemental attribute. It could not be used to increase one's cultivation. It only had one use: battle. Just like Chu Luan, his heavenly martial sword body reacted faster than his consciousness. Moreover, that reaction was the most accurate reaction. If Chu Luan could master his heavenly martial sword body and fully unleash its abilities, Chu Mu's heart trembled when he thought of this. Perhaps when he reached that level, with the same strength, he would not be able to defeat Chu Luan. Since he understood that Chu Mu's body was special, he had to make some changes to his teaching. This adjustment was to let Chu Luan adapt to his heavenly martial sword body. Gradually, his consciousness would catch up with his body's reaction and then surpass it. Then, he would be able to control it. Without a doubt, this would be a long and difficult process. Chu Mu did not have enough time. He could only lay down a foundation for Chu Luan. In the future, he would have to rely on his own efforts. Time passed day by day. Every day, Chu Luan and swordsman Ao Xian were improving. Finally, more than 8 months had passed. Book number 2401598. Title: Power Door Introduction. Possessing the power system, creating a rich and powerful family. Brothers, you can go take a look. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:27. The sky was dark and dark clouds were rolling in the sky, covering the earth and the sky. Raindrops the size of beans fell from the sky. The torrential rain poured down, hitting the roof, the leaves, and the ground, creating a continuous and boundless sound. This torrential rain seemed to have merged with the heavens and the earth, and there was no distinction between up and down. The wind blew, and the whistling sound added a bit of rhythm to this stormy day. It was a sad day because of the storm and because of the farewell. In such weather, most people stayed at home and didn't go out to avoid getting wet. But at that moment, outside of Kaiyang City, there was a large group of people. There were more than 100 of them. They were all holding oil paper umbrellas and standing in the storm. Their shoes, pants and skirts were all wet, but they didn't notice it. Each and every one of them was staring at the silhouette in front of them. Their eyes were filled with reluctance. Some of them had tears in their eyes, but they didn't want to let them fall. That silhouette didn't hold an umbrella. He just stood there in the storm, allowing the rain to fall. The raindrops fell on his body as if they were separated by an invisible layer. There wasn't a single drop of rain falling on the ground. It was dry and clean. The rain is heavy, let's go back. Chu Mu's eyes slowly swept over everyone as he opened his mouth and spoke lightly. His tone was slightly trembling. He tried his best to restrain the reluctance and excitement in his heart as his face remained indifferent. Mu-er. Li Yunlan's eyes were filled with tears. Chu Xingyun supported Li Yunlan and looked at Chu Mu without saying a word. Chu Mu could feel the reluctance and encouragement in his heart. Teacher, when can I see you again? A small figure walked towards Chu Mu. She stood upright and stubbornly in front of Chu Mu. Raising her head, Chu Luan's lips trembled before she spoke. Her voice was slightly sobbing. One day, you will be able to enter the unparalleled Sword Sovereign Assembly. Then, you will have the opportunity to see me again." Chu Mu stretched out his hand and rubbed Chu Luan's head. He laughed lightly and said, "Train well and remember my teachings." Her voice fell, but Chu Luan was already sobbing. She just hugged Chu Mu's hand, lowered her head and clenched her teeth. Looking at Chu Luan, Chu Mu's eyes had a trace of warmth. Although they had only known each other for a few months, Chu Mu had truly put in his heart and soul to teach Chu Luan. In Chu Luan's heart, Chu Mu was the same as the old man who adopted him. They were both the most important people in his life. They were irreplaceable. "I'm leaving." Withdrawing his palm, Chu Mu glanced at the crowd again. Then, his figure shot straight up into the sky. With a turn, he transformed into a stream of light and flew into the distance. "Ah Mu, remember to come back when you have time." Chu Tian suddenly roared into the sky. Sword chi surged and thunder roared, resounding through heaven and earth, causing the rainstorm to explode. "If I could, I would naturally come back. However, this trip—" Chu Tian's loud roar entered his ears. Chu Mu bitterly laughed and silently said, "The supreme ancient world, what kind of world was it?" Chu Mu did not know. He did not have the slightest understanding. He also did not know if he could come back after entering the supreme ancient world. He also did not know what would happen to him in the supreme ancient world. Maybe he could go one step further and reach the other side of the sword path. Maybe he would encounter some danger and be buried in the supreme ancient world. Everything was unknown. No swordsman could be sure that they would not die. This time, he did not know what the future would be like. He could only follow his heart and move forward, cutting through all obstacles. Chu Mu was relieved about the Chu family. He did not need to worry about them anymore. Because in these 9 months, he had left a lot of resources for the Chu family and also laid a solid foundation for them. The 12 Aoxian sword guards, under Chu Mu's nurturing, had all reached the initial stage of the Qi-Si realm. Of course, there were differences in strength. Some had reached the peak of the initial stage of the Qi-Si realm, while others had just stabilized the initial stage of the Qi-Si realm. Their battle abilities, under Chu Mu's nurturing, had also surpassed many swordsmen of the same level. To put it simply, in the Eastern Sword region, without using the Whitehead of Aoxian, every sword guard Aoxian's true strength was comparable to other sword masters who had reached the late Qi high realm. If they used the Whitehead of Aoxian, they could even kill normal peak Qi high realm sword masters. If the Aoxian swordsmen worked together and set up the sword rain formation, the power would be terrifying enough to kill any sword master. Even if it was a sword master like Zhu Wudao, they would still be able to fight him. In the Great Kuan dynasty, this kind of strength was enough to do whatever they wanted. Other than the Aoxian swordsmen, the Chu family also had a few more Qi high realm swordsmen and a few more Qi transformation realm swordsmen. It could be said that because of Chu Mu's return, the overall strength of the Chu family had increased by a few times in just 9 months. What the Chu family lacked now was an origin realm swordsman. However, with the Chu family's foundation, it would not be easy to produce an origin realm swordsman. It would take at least 20 to 30 years. All in all, Chu Mu had built a solid foundation for the Chu family. As long as the Chu family continued to develop with this foundation, the Chu family could become the #1 family in the Great Kuan dynasty in a few decades. They would not be any weaker than those top-rank sword sects. In fact, Chu Mu did not expect the Chu family to become very strong. He only hoped that the Chu family could develop steadily and truly from the inside out. He did not want the Chu family to become blind and arrogant just because they had some strength. He did not want the Chu family to be like those other families, who were arrogant and eventually destroyed by powerful enemies. As for his only disciple, Chu Luan, his comprehension was not bad, but what was really good was his Tianwu sword body. Chu Mu believed that as long as Chu Luan worked hard to cultivate and master the potential of his Tianwu sword body, He would definitely be able to enter the unparalleled Sword Sovereign Assembly in the future and go to the immemorial world. The current Chu Luan, after half a year of bitter cultivation, had reached the beginning of the Qi transformation realm in his sword Qi cultivation. He had also comprehended the minor success of sword force, the metal mentality and the wind mentality. He had also seen blood. Therefore, although Chu Luan was still young, he already had the strength to easily kill a normal Qi transformation realm swordsman. He could definitely compete with a normal Qi transformation realm swordsman. Chu Luan's future would be smooth sailing. Chu Mu did not immediately leave the Great Kuan dynasty. Instead, he headed to the Great Kuan Sword Palace to meet the Palace Master. As soon as Chu Mu entered the Great Kuan Sword Palace, the elders, the Outer Palace Master, the Inner Palace Master, and the Royal Palace Master all came to welcome him. This was because Chu Mu was qualified to do so. Because of Chu Mu, the Great Kuan Sword Palace's reputation had soared. And because of Chu Mu, the Great Kuan Sword Palace was slowly recovering its former glory. After some small talk, Chu Mu met the Palace Master. "I have completed the task that the Palace Master entrusted me with," Chu Mu said, and told him about the Li family's situation. "I didn't expect so many things to happen." "Thank you, Chu Mu," the Palace Master said. "That's what I should do." Chu Mu smiled. The Palace Master's meteor sword essence had helped Chu Mu survive a life and death crisis. Now there was still half of the meteor sword essence left. Next, Chu Mu and the Palace Master chatted for a while. After more than 2 hours, Chu Mu asked to leave. After meeting his friends in the Great Kuan Sword Palace, Chu Mu left the Great Kuan Sword Palace and the Great Kuan Dynasty, heading towards the port of the Tongming River. This time, Chu Mu did not fly across the Tongming River directly. Instead, he took the ferry on the Tongming River. This was his second time taking the ferry. The first time was when he had just left the Eastern Sword Domain and entered the Central Main Sword Domain to train. This second time might also be his last time taking the ferry. Chu Mu retracted his aura. In the eyes of others, he was just like an ordinary person. He sat in the corner of the deck and looked calmly at the sparkling surface of the Tongming River. After so many years, although Chu Mu's appearance had not changed much, his temperament was different from before. Due to the passage of time, those who had seen Chu Mu before could not recognize him. They could only vaguely feel that they had seen him somewhere before, but they could not recall where at the moment. Maybe he is someone we have seen before. He is not famous. Some people who had taken the same ferry as Chu Mu thought to themselves. However, Chu Mu's face was still lingering in their minds. They could not help but make guesses. It was as if there was a membrane blocking them. They wanted to pierce through that membrane and find out Chu Mu's identity, but they could not pierce through it. It was as if they were possessed. It was very uncomfortable. It would take a month to cross the Tongming River by ferry. Chu Mu had already calculated the time. He could not stay on the ferry for so long. The reason why he took the ferry was just to reminisce. 10 days later, Chu Mu, who had been sitting at the side of the ferry, suddenly flew up into the air, attracting many gazes. What is that person doing? Is he planning to fly across the Tongming River? How is that possible? Amidst the exclamations, Chu Mu turned into a stream of light and disappeared in a flash. Everything was like a dream. What fast speed, who is he? I have seen his face before. Crossing the Tongming River at such a speed. A name was on the verge of being called out in some people's hearts. Chu Mu, he is Chu Mu. Zhen Tian Sword Venerable Chu Mu, the glory of unparalleled swordsmanship, the glory of unparalleled comprehension, the glory of unparalleled Chu Mu. Exclamations sounded like thunder exploding in everyone's ears. He is Chu Mu. I actually took the same ferry as Chu Mu. 10 days, I saw him for 10 days and did not recognize him. I did not even say a word to him. Many people beat their chests and stomped their feet, lamenting that they had missed a good opportunity. They felt that they might have been able to get some pointers and teachings from Chu Mu by talking with Chu Mu. Even if they did not, being able to talk to Chu Mu for a while was a great honor in their eyes. No matter what, they had taken the same ferry as Chu Mu. In the future, they could tell their descendants that they had taken the same ferry as Zhen Tian Sword Venerable Chu Mu for 10 days. Chu Mu did not know any of this. His speed was even faster than when he returned to the Eastern Sword Domain. He soon crossed the Tongming River and headed for the center of the Central Sword Domain, the 100 Saints Mountain. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 628. Wind and clouds gathered at the 100 Saints Mountain. 10,000 sword venerables arrived at the 100 Saints Alliance's main hall. Everyone, today is the important day for you to enter the immemorial world. Get ready, a sword saint said slowly. The sword venerables did not answer. Their spirits were at their peak and their auras were sharp. Their expressions expressed their inner thoughts. They were already prepared. I don't know what you will encounter in the immemorial world this time, but one thing is certain. The immemorial world is a place where the strong are respected. You can only gain a foothold in the immemorial world if you continue to improve yourself and become stronger. Otherwise, you may be buried in a foreign land. When this sentence was said, it inevitably added a bit of desolation. Who would be willing to die in a foreign land? As such, he could only make himself stronger. The sword venerables, who did not know much about the immemorial world, did not have a deep feeling. Even though they knew that there were countless experts in the immemorial world, and that it was definitely 10 times or even 100 times stronger than the ancient sword continent, that was only in theory. They had never seen it with their own eyes, so of course they would not feel anything. I am Bai Qingshui, Aurora Sword Saint. You can call me Senior Bai. Sword Saint Ling Shuang and I will follow you into the immemorial world, the Sword Saint said finally. The sword venerables were startled, but they immediately understood. Thinking about it, the 10,000 sword venerables were the 10,000 most outstanding in the ancient sword continent. Once they entered the immemorial world, it was basically the same as leaving the ancient sword continent. If they did not take care of them and something happened, it would be the ancient sword continent's loss. The two sword saints would follow them. On one hand, they could deal with some matters, and on the other hand, it was equivalent to protecting their safety. Time passed slowly. After about a quarter of an hour, Bai Qingshui suddenly looked up at the roof of the 100 Saints' palace. However, he felt something coming. With a soft sound, Bai Qingshui disappeared and appeared in the sky outside the 100 Saints Alliance's main hall. Chu Mu and the other sword venerables also rushed out of the 100 Saints Alliance's main hall and looked up at the sky. The sky above the 100 Saints Mountain was clear and cloudless. It was a deep and vast blue, as if one could reach out and touch that clear sky. After observing for a full 15 minutes, Chu Mu and the others did not discover anything unusual. However, Bai Qingshui's gaze was fixed on the sky and did not shift. His expression was serious and carried a trace of excitement. It was as if he was telling others that something important had happened. Many figures appeared strangely around Bai Qingshui, exuding a profound and vast aura, as if they wanted to compete with the heavens. They were the other sword saints of the 100 Saints Alliance. It was unknown where a whistling sound came from, but it swept through the heavens and earth. Chu Mu and the others felt a formless wind sweep past their bodies. They suddenly had an indescribable feeling. It was as if something extraordinary was about to appear. The whistling sound gradually grew louder, and gusts of wind blew over, roaring. The clear blue sky suddenly changed, and right above the 100 Saints Mountain, a black dot strangely appeared. As soon as the black dot appeared, a terrifying power descended, causing Chu Mu and the other sword venerables' expressions to change. The black dot expanded bit by bit. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that the expanding black dot was like a whirlpool, as if an immemorial beast was slowly opening its mouth. It was also like a black hole sucking in the entire sky. In the blink of an eye, the black hole had expanded to a diameter of 100 meters, but it showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it sped up. Strangely, Chu Mu and the others did not feel the slightest suction force. It did not seem to be targeting them. Could it be that the people from the immemorial world are coming? The Sword Venerables' hearts trembled as they stared at the black hole without blinking. They were secretly shocked. In the blink of an eye, the black hole had expanded to a diameter of 1,000 meters, but it was still expanding. It was hard to imagine how far the black hole would expand before it stopped. The Sword Saints of the 100 Saints Alliance all stared at the black hole solemnly. Although they knew about the immemorial world, they had never been there, so they naturally had a yearning for it. In the face of the unknown, people were always vigilant. Even Sword Saints were no exception. Faced with the expanding black hole, the Sword Saints dared not let down their guard. If there was any movement that was detrimental to the ancient Sword Continent, they would immediately take action. Once the dozens of Sword Saints took action, the power was no joke. It was absolutely devastating. It must be known that in a world like the ancient Sword Continent, every Sword Saint was a destructive existence. They could easily split mountains and cut rivers with a single strike. They believed that even if the people from the immemorial world were to do anything detrimental to the ancient Sword Continent, they would not be able to withstand the attacks of dozens of Sword Saints. The black hole continued to expand, like a huge mouth that was about to swallow the ancient Sword Continent. Strands of terrifying pressure emanated from the black hole. When it passed through the bodies of Chu Mu and the others, they immediately felt as if their bodies were thousands of kilograms heavy. 10,000 meters. After the black hole expanded to 10,000 meters in diameter, it suddenly stopped. Only the edge of the black hole was still spinning like a blade. It was extremely cold and frightening. The black hole was so huge that it could be seen clearly within 1,000 miles of the 100 Saints Mountain. Fortunately, there were few people within 1,000 miles of the 100 Saints Mountain, so it did not cause too much of a commotion. Suddenly, Chu Mu's pupils trembled. He vaguely saw a silhouette appear in the black hole and slowly descend. It was a behemoth. After a while, everyone's eyes widened. Their pupils contracted sharply as they stared at the behemoth descending from the black hole. It was like a plate that had been magnified countless times. In Chu Mu's description, it was like a disc-shaped spaceship that flew out of a sci-fi movie. With a diameter of nearly 10,000 meters, such a behemoth appeared in front of everyone. For them, it was a great visual impact. It was incomparably shocking from the depths of their hearts. Even Chu Mu, who had seen many sci-fi blockbusters, could not help but feel shocked. After all, a movie was just a movie. Now, he was actually seeing it in real life. It was not sci-fi, but it was even more shocking than sci-fi. Immemorial. Divine ship. A Sword Saint stammered. His eyes bulged out. He was very shocked. Immemorial divine ship. It was something recorded in some ancient materials of the 100 Saints Alliance. There were descriptions, pictures, and so on. As for the materials, they were left behind by the first Sword Saint who founded the 100 Saints Alliance a long time ago. They had seen the immemorial divine ship with their own eyes. In the materials, there were many records and pictures of the immemorial divine ship. When they first saw it, they were very shocked. They did not expect that when they actually saw the immemorial divine ship, the shock was more than 10 times stronger. The huge immemorial divine ship slowly descended from the sky and stopped about 1,000 meters above the 100 Saints Alliance's main hall. It was majestic and motionless. A huge pressure poured down as if the sky was collapsing. It crushed everything, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. It was as if they were drowning. The motionless immemorial divine ship in the sky was like a sleeping beast. Suddenly, the center of the immemorial divine ship spun like a whirlpool, and a pitch-black hole appeared. The hole suddenly lit up, and then a golden light shot out. It turned into a beam of light and landed on the square of the 100 Saints Alliance. Members of the ancient Sword Continent may enter the immemorial divine ship through the light of teleportation. A cold voice sounded. It came from the immemorial divine ship and entered everyone's ears. This is the voice of the people of the immemorial world. It's no different from us, a sword saint muttered. Indeed, the people of the immemorial world were the same as the people of the ancient Sword Continent. They were all humans of the same race. However, the immemorial world was a higher-level world than the ancient Sword Continent. It was precisely because they were of a higher level, because there were countless experts, and because the appearance of the immemorial divine ship brought about an incomparably powerful shock to their souls, that they felt that the people of the immemorial world were so high and mighty that they began to doubt themselves. This was a very normal mentality. However, not everyone had such thoughts. For example, Chu Mu and the others with strong wills did not think so. Let's go. The Aurora Sword Saint, by Qing Shui, was the first to fly into the golden light pillar. After entering it, one could vaguely see his body following the golden light pillar and flying upwards. Then, the second figure also entered the golden light pillar. It was the Frost Sword Saint. 10,000 sword saints moved one after another. They turned into flowing lights and rushed into the golden light pillar. Most of the sword saints rushed into the golden light pillar without looking back. Only a few sword saints stopped when they got close to the golden light pillar. They turned around and looked at the mountains and rivers around them. Then, they rushed into the golden light pillar. The moment Chu Mu entered the golden light pillar, he immediately felt his body flying upwards uncontrollably. He was extremely fast. Just like him, the other sword saints also rushed into the sky. Looking from the outside, countless figures could be seen flying towards the immemorial divine ship from within the golden light pillar. In just 10 breaths of time, 10,000 sword saints passed through the golden light pillar and entered the immemorial divine ship. Then, the golden light pillar quickly retracted. The whirlpool at the bottom of the immemorial divine ship also quickly closed. With a slight tremble, a terrifying sound wave spread out. The immemorial divine ship moved and started to rise. Dozens of sword saints stared at the immemorial divine ship. They watched as the immemorial divine ship rose into the sky bit by bit. Then, it entered the huge black whirlpool in the sky that was 10,000 meters in diameter and disappeared bit by bit. As the immemorial divine ship left, the black whirlpool in the sky that looked like the mouth of an immemorial giant beast closed bit by bit. Under the gaze of dozens of sword saints, it finally turned into a small black dot and disappeared completely. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 629. The immemorial divine ship was divided into 4 levels. The first level was a huge plaza, the second, third, and fourth levels had many rooms, and in the middle was a sword arena with a diameter of 1,000 meters. The 10,000 sword venerables and 2 sword saints of the ancient sword continent could be easily accommodated by this immemorial divine ship. Welcome, swordsmen of the ancient sword continent. On the first level, a middle-aged man wearing a golden red cape stood on a high platform and spoke to the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent as if he was the master. On the left and right of the middle-aged man stood 2 youths who looked to be in their 20s. The distance between the ancient sword continent and the immemorial world is about 100 light years. The immemorial divine ship will travel through the space-time wormhole for about a month. A month later, you will arrive at the immemorial world. Let me first congratulate you for being able to enter the immemorial world and leave the backward ancient sword continent. The middle-aged man spoke again with a slight smile on his face, as if he was welcoming them, but it gave off a fake feeling. There was a smile on his face, but his eyes didn't change at all. They were indifferent, and if one looked carefully, they could see traces of disdain. Disdain for the ancient sword continent. This middle-aged man was a sword saint expert. Chu Mu and the others didn't know how he was compared to the sword saints of the ancient sword continent, but his attitude made the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent very unhappy. Disdain and contempt. It was as if he treated the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent as bumpkins. The two youths on the left and right of the middle-aged man had indifferent expressions. When their gazes fell on Chu Mu and the others, their disdain was very obvious. Their eyes were high and mighty, as if they were great. This wouldn't make the sword sovereigns of the ancient sword continent angry, because they were all elites of the sword sovereigns of the ancient sword continent. They were elites who had walked through countless battles and countless life and death situations. Since they were elites, how could they be angry because of the other party's disdain and contempt? The two beside me are ordinary disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. You are all young, so you can interact more. You can also have a faster and more direct understanding of the swordsmen of the immemorial world. The middle-aged sword saint smiled, but there was no smile in his eyes. Although his words were correct, they weren't fools and naturally understood the meaning behind them. Of course. Bai Qing smiled. He did not ask for the middle-aged sword saint's name. It was very simple. From the moment they met, the middle-aged sword saint had no intention of introducing himself. Coupled with his words and attitude, it was clear that he discriminated against the swordsmen of ancient sword continent. Since there was such discrimination, how could Bai Qing stick his warm face to the other party's cold butt? Especially since Bai Qing was a sword saint. As a sword saint, he would not be inferior to the other party. If you're tired, there are rooms for you to rest in on the immemorial divine ship. It's very spacious. Everyone can have one room. In addition, there are all kinds of drinks and food. You can try them all. I guarantee that the food here is more delicious than the food on ancient sword continent. You'll enjoy it so much that you won't want to leave, the middle-aged sword saint said again. His words were filled with contempt. Everyone, please go and choose your rooms, Bai Qing said. As for the Frost and Frost Sword Saint, he turned around and left without saying a word. After all the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent left, the middle-aged sword saint said to the two young swordsmen, "Don't kill anyone. Sir, don't worry. We know our limits," one of the two young swordsmen said. The other one had a sinister grin on his face. The rooms on the immemorial divine ship were indeed not bad. Every room had a different feeling. Some felt fresh, some felt ancient, some felt gorgeous, some felt cold, and some felt hot. The character of a swordsman would more or less be affected by the cultivation method and the profound meaning of the swordsmanship they cultivated. For example, swordsmen who cultivated the profound of ice preferred to live in cold places. On the other hand, swordsmen who cultivated the profound of fire preferred to live in hotter places, which made them feel more comfortable. Chu Mu chose a room with a yellowish-brown color as its main color. It looked simple and desolate. As someone who cultivated the Tian Huang sword scripture, he happened to like this kind of environment. This kind of atmosphere made him feel comfortable. A month's time was neither long nor short. Perhaps it would be over if he went into seclusion once. This room was almost sealed. Even if he was curious about the outside of the immemorial divine ship, he couldn't see it. At this moment, the immemorial divine ship was shuttling through the endless darkness. There seemed to be specks of starlight rapidly receding. If anyone could see it, they would definitely have a strange feeling that time was flowing backward. 100 light-years meant that it would take 100 years to fly at the speed of light. However, after the immemorial divine ship entered the space-time wormhole, it only took a month. This was enough to show that the ship's speed was unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Chu Mu stayed in his room and meditated. There was a knock on the door. After opening it, Su Haosha stood at the door. "The two immemorial swordsmen have issued a challenge to us. Do you want to go take a look?" Su Haosha smiled and directly stated his intentions. "Okay." Chu Mu didn't hesitate at all. He walked out of the room and closed the door. Together with Su Haosha, they went to the first level of the immemorial divine ship. The first level had the immemorial divine ship's control room, as well as a hall. There was also a place for sword training and sparring. At this moment, many swordsmen had gathered in the arena. Almost all of them were sword sovereigns of the ancient sword continent. Who else is willing to come up and fight? Let me see the techniques of the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent. On the arena, one of the two young swordsmen stood with his head held high and his chest puffed out. He held his long sword and pointed it at the ground. His expression was arrogant. His sharp gaze swept across the crowd, and a strange smile hung on his lips. Many swordsmen of the ancient sword continent glared at the immemorial swordsman on the arena. The other immemorial swordsman stood below the arena, holding his sword. He had a half-smile on his face, and the faint disdain in his eyes was very obvious. Below the arena, a swordsman struggled to get up. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was pale. Clearly, he had suffered serious internal injuries. "Let me!" A voice filled with rage rang out, following which, a silhouette flashed through the crowd and landed on the arena like an eagle. Glaring at his opponent, the silhouette unsheathed his sword. "Let me, Su Qing, experience your moves. There's no need to say your name. I never remember the names of losers." The immemorial swordsman sneered. "One sword. I will only use one sword to defeat you. Cut the crap." Su Qing's expression turned cold. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's as he stared at his opponent. That sharpness seemed to be able to pierce through his opponent. "Scram!" shouted the immemorial sword cultivator coldly. He slashed out with his sword. In an instant, a cyan sword light broke through the air. The power of the wind immediately dispersed. It was incomparably sharp and left a clear mark in the air. Profound wind. Chu Mu and the other swordsmen with stronger spiritual senses were stunned. "No, it's not profound wind. It's profound wind, but it seems to be different from ordinary profound wind." Doubts appeared in their minds. In an instant, the green sword light slashed at Su Qing. Su Qing had no time to dodge at all. He could only block with his sword and was immediately hit. His entire body was sent flying, and blood spurted out of his mouth as he fell off the arena. "It's profound wind. It's the same as the profound wind that we have comprehended, but it seems to be purer." Su Haosha frowned. Su Qing has the strength of an extreme sword saint, but he was still defeated. Such terrifying strength. He defeated Su Qing with one sword strike. Only the top 10 sword saints could compete with him. "I heard that there are 10 strongest people among you. I, Sidushio, would like to ask for some advice today. I wonder if the top 10 sword saints are willing to teach me?" The immemorial swordsman on the arena said proudly. Let me, Lai Shanhu, teach you a lesson." A ferocious aura filled the air as Lai Shanhu appeared on the sword battle arena. He was like a ferocious tiger that had come down from the mountains. His terrifying aura swept out, startling his opponent. Traces of seriousness appeared in his eyes. "I hope you can take one sword strike from me," Situ said. His heart was heavy, but his mouth did not show any sign of weakness. Lai Shanhu sneered and directly attacked with his sword. A fierce tiger roar sounded out, and the tiger on the fierce tiger sword jumped out. It jumped high into the air, and its sharp claws fiercely slapped at Sidushio's head. Once it hit, his head would be crushed. "Child's play," Sidushio sneered. His body was like a gust of wind, rushing towards that huge tiger and slashing out with his sword. The swordsmen of the ancient sword continent were stunned. Even Chu Mu was surprised. He had personally experienced the terror of that tiger, and he did not dare to face it head-on. He did not expect Sidushio to dare to do so. In just a moment, Sidushio's body was like a gust of wind, avoiding the tiger's sharp claws. His body passed by the tiger, and his sword carried the power of the wind profound, cutting through the tiger's body. A slight puffing sound was heard as the tiger fell to the ground. It instantly dissipated into wisps of green smoke. Situ Xiu's body turned in the air and dove down. He waved his long sword, and a green light condensed on the sword. His speed suddenly increased by 2 times. In the air, only a series of afterimages were left. Lai Shanhu's pupils shrank. He did not expect Situ Xiu to be able to kill his tiger with one sword strike and attack him at such a fast speed. He did not have time to think. Relying on his instinct, he slashed out his sword. A huge sword light broke through the air, and it was extremely heavy. At the same time, Lai Shanhu bent his legs, and his power exploded. The whole arena shook, and his whole body shot up like a meteor. A powerful power gathered on the fierce tiger sword, and the patterns on it shone brightly. Vaguely, one could hear the roar of a tiger. Kill. The collision was extremely intense, and the horrifying power exploded in an instant. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 630. Situ Xiu and Lai Shanhu fought to a draw, while the other immemorial swordsman, Yang Lai, fought to a draw with Wan Qingxian. Neither of them used the power of sword principle. This result was very surprising because Situ Xiu and Yang Lai were both less than 30 years old, while Lai Shanhu was nearly 40 years old and Wan Qingxian was in his 40s. In the room, Chu Mu closed his eyes and was deep in thought. After the draw, the 2 immemorial swordsmen did not provoke him anymore. Everything quieted down, but many people were not calm. According to Situ Xiu and Yang Lai, they were just ordinary disciples in the so-called Sky Edge Sword Palace. Ordinary disciples in their 20s could fight to a draw with 2 of the top 10 sword venerables of the ancient sword continent. This was a huge blow to the sword venerables of the ancient sword continent. Immemorial swordsman. Chu Mu clenched his fist. Even though he was much stronger now than he was at the unparalleled sword venerable assembly, he was not confident that he could fight against Situ Xiu or Yang Lai. Their fighting style. Recalling Situ Xiu and Yang Lai's fighting style, Chu Mu's closed eyes suddenly opened. There was a flash of light that left a clear trace in the air. Chu Mu was very familiar with the fighting style of the ancient sword continent swordsman, but the fighting style of Situ Xiu and Yang Lai was both familiar and unfamiliar to him. It was familiar because the fighting style of the ancient sword continent swordsman was mixed in. It was unfamiliar because this was the first time he had seen swordsmen use such a fighting style. Although the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent also paid attention to the control of power, they still mainly pursued tyrannical power. Every sword technique strived to increase the power, and it would be best if it was powerful enough to kill a strong enemy in one strike. There was no doubt that the more powerful the sword technique, the more energy it would consume. The time it took to accumulate energy would also be quite long. After using it, the temporary burden on the body would also be increased. There was no way to use it continuously. However, the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent seemed to be used to such a fighting style. They constantly pursued it and walked further and further on this path. No one had ever questioned it. Chu Mu also did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. After all, the sword was a killing weapon. Its existence was to kill strong enemies. But now, Chu Mu's thoughts had been impacted and changed. Situ Xiu and Yang Lai's fighting style was somewhat similar to the swordsmen of ancient sword continent, and also somewhat similar to swordmasters. Their swords didn't seem to be very powerful, but they were very suitable. Their timing was very accurate, and every sword seemed to have been carefully calculated. Situ Xiu's sword sliced through Lai Shanhu's ferocious tiger attack. She then turned her sword in midair and slashed down. Her power was contained within the sword, and a portion of it affected the air outside, causing the air to oppress Lai Shanhu. On the other hand, Lai Shanhu's sword was extremely tyrannical. It was wide open and its power was surging. It seemed to be even stronger than Sitoshio's, but when they clashed, they were evenly matched. In comparison, Sitoshio's fighting style was more skillful. Although Chu Mu's strength was not as good as his opponent's, his eyesight was better than his opponent's. He could tell with a single glance that Sitoshio was not as good as Lai Shanhu in terms of absolute strength. However, they ended up in a draw. What did that mean? It meant that Sitoshio's fighting style was better. It seems like the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent have all walked on the wrong path. He sighed softly. Thinking about it, it made sense. The ancient world was the center, and the ancient sword continent was just a fragment of the ancient world. After a long time, many of the essences had been lost, and they had gradually deviated from the correct path. Controlling the power, releasing it at will. Gathering the power at the moment of the attack will reduce the consumption of energy, and also make it harder for the opponent to defend. Chu Mu's mind kept replaying the scene of Sitoshio and Yang Lai attacking. His eyes became brighter and brighter, and he gradually understood. Sitoshio and Yang Lai are not perfect. There are still traces to be found. At that moment, Chu Mu attacked with his sword. It was a simple attack, and there was no energy fluctuation. Chu Mu did not pour any sword energy, sword intent, or profound power into it. However, the speed of the sword stabbing out was extremely fast and soundless. At the last moment, the sword yuan, the sword intent, and the profound power all poured into the sword. The power reached the tip of the sword, and the space around the tip of the sword turned turbid before slowly dissipating. The direction is correct, but it's not perfect. Chu Mu sighed and said to himself. However, as long as the direction was correct, the path became clear. Perhaps the ancient world has a detailed description and guidance about this battle method. His desire to enter the ancient world became more and more urgent. Although it was urgent, Chu Mu knew that he still needed 20 days. Moreover, even if he entered the ancient world, he might not be able to obtain any detailed information. Therefore, he could only comprehend it himself. He unceasingly recalled the fight between Sitoshio and Yang Lai. He didn't miss a single detail of their unsheathing of swords, attacking, retracting, and so on. Moreover, the replay in Chu Mu's mind became clearer and clearer, becoming extremely detailed. Without a doubt, whether it was Sitoshio or Yang Lai, they had only grasped the surface of this battle method. It could be said that they had not reached the true beginner level. This was Chu Mu's judgment after watching it many times. No matter if it was Sitoshio or Yang Lai, when they attacked, they would inject their power into their swords. This was because they did not have a profound grasp of their sword. Otherwise, they would be able to inject their power into their swords at the instant their swords touched their targets and explode. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, another 5 days had passed. Chu Mu had been staying in his room all this time. The other swordsmen were also quietly cultivating in their rooms. Although the wine and food on the immemorial divine ship were indeed delicious, it was not worth mentioning when compared to strength. When the sword sovereigns of the ancient sword continent saw the battle between Sitoshio and Yang Lai, alarm bells rang in their hearts. They were only 2 youngsters from the immemorial world. In terms of age, they were younger than them. However, they had such terrifying strength. Almost every sword attack was born to kill the target. It was simple, direct, and fierce. There were only 20 days left before they entered the immemorial world. At that time, they did not know what kind of encounter they would encounter. In any case, they could only increase their strength as much as possible. Only by becoming stronger could they deal with the upcoming unknown. I heard that these 10,000 swordsmen are the strongest 10,000 sword sovereigns in the ancient sword continent. How disappointing! Sitoshio smiled in a room. Among the 10,000, only the so-called top 10 sword sovereigns are worth looking at. However, that is all. They have cultivation base, sword intent, and profound, but they do not know how to control their power. They will always be at the lesser attainment realm. It will be difficult for them to achieve anything. Yang Lai smiled coldly. If I reach the immemorial realm, I can definitely defeat that Lai Shan Hu. Situ Xiu said. Immemorial realm is good, but it is easier said than done. Yang Lai sighed. He had put in a lot of effort to pursue the path of controlling his power. However, his progress was minimal. He did not know when he would reach the immemorial realm. Don't be sad. I have a feeling that I will definitely reach the immemorial realm within 5 years. Situ Xiu smiled. A trace of disdain flashed in her eyes. As for those country bumpkins, even if you give them 10, 20, 30 years, they might not be able to reach the immemorial realm. These people think that entering our immemorial world is an opportunity to soar. They do not know that it is a blow that is enough to make them sink. That is not necessarily true. Who knows, there might be a few people who can stand out among them. Yang Lai smiled. Even if they stand out, they will still be cannon fodder. Situ Xiu sneered. Half a month passed. Chu Mu, who had been sitting still, slowly opened his eyes. They weren't sharp and oppressive, nor were they radiant. Instead, they were crystal clear, like clear spring water that could reflect everything. It was as if there were various mysteries evolving within them. Chu Mu did not move. The 8 desolate sky swords suddenly came out of their sheaths and stabbed to the side. This stab was like an aurora. It was silent and extremely fast. In an instant, sword energy surged, sword intent exploded, and profound power poured in. The 3 forces merged into one and the force reached the tip of the sword. A tiny blind spot appeared in the space where the tip of the sword came in contact with. That blind spot only existed for a breath of time before disappearing. No one knew how powerful Chu Mu's stab was. What was that blind spot? If Situ Xiu and Yang Lai saw Chu Mu's stab, they would definitely be shocked. This was a realm that they could not reach. Sheathing his sword, he stabbed again. This time, it had the mountain quake force. However, the blind spot where the tip of the sword came in contact with was shattered. The mountain quake force could not be perfectly integrated. Chu Mu slowly sheathed his sword. He frowned slightly as he pondered. According to his usual practice, the mountain quake force would be integrated with the sword intent and profound power. However, this time it failed. Chu Mu was very clear about this failure. It was not because he was not proficient enough. It was a failure where different domains could not be integrated. Just like how life and death could not appear in a person at the same time, the mountain quake force could not coexist with other forces. Why was that? Chu Mu was confused. He couldn't figure it out. More and more doubts appeared in his mind. One thought after another crazily rushed into his brain. Gradually, Chu Mu felt overloaded. He felt as if his brain was being stuffed with stone after stone. Chu Mu quickly stopped thinking. He took a deep breath and temporarily dispelled all the doubts in his mind. Otherwise, his brain would not be able to bear it. It was very likely that it would cause his spiritual world to collapse and his soul to be damaged. A strong desire for knowledge burst out from Chu Mu's heart. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 631. For swordsmen, going into seclusion was a common occurrence. It was normal for swordsmen to go into seclusion for as little as a dozen days or as long as a few years. The primordial divine ship traveled through the space-time wormhole at a speed many times faster than the speed of light. The swordsmen in the ship did not feel anything at all. It was so smooth that it was as if they were living on land. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. It was worth mentioning that during this month, the middle-aged sword saint from the immemorial divine ship had challenged the Aurora sword saint, but no one had watched. As for the result of the battle, no one knew because neither the middle-aged sword saint nor the Aurora sword saint had said anything. However, the middle-aged sword saint's expression was terrible. One could imagine that even if he did not lose the battle with the Aurora Sword Saint, by Qingshui, it might have been a draw. A month had passed. Inside the immemorial divine ship, the sword venerables who were meditating all opened their eyes. Sharp light shot out of their eyes and pierced through the void. After a while, an indifferent voice that contained traces of anger rang out, entering every room and every swordsman's ears. Swordsmen of the ancient sword continent, we have arrived at the primordial world. You may leave the primordial divine ship. It was the middle-aged sword saint's voice. Even now, the swordsmen of the ancient sword continent did not know how to address him. However, it did not matter. If one did not know how to respect others, naturally no one would respect him. We have arrived at the primordial world. Have we finally arrived? The swordsmen of the ancient sword continent trembled in their hearts. Their eyes were filled with excitement, and even their breathing became rapid. A world with countless experts, a world filled with endless reveries, a world with countless opportunities. Unknowingly, the primordial divine ship had stopped. The people inside could not see, but many people had gathered on the ground outside. They all looked up at the primordial divine ship in the sky. The primordial divine ship has returned. Which continent is this primordial divine ship heading to? I don't know. Who cares which continent it is, it's just a bunch of country bumpkins. All sorts of discussions rang out. Their voices were filled with disdain and contempt. Not long after, another primordial divine ship appeared from the void. Not long after, a total of 9 primordial divine ships appeared in the sky in a row. More and more people gathered around. These people were not very old, around 20 years old. Some were in their 20s, while others were in their 30s. Almost all of them had disdain and contempt in their eyes. Only a few people had a trace of curiosity in their eyes. They were just curious about what swordsmen from other worlds were like. With a buzzing sound, the bottom of the 9 primordial divine ships opened, and golden pillars of light poured down. Then, under the gaze of countless people, figures appeared in the golden pillars of light and slowly descended. After a while, a large group of people stood under each immemorial divine ship. There were 2 sword saints and 10,000 sword venerables. The golden pillar of light retracted and the bottom closed. The archaic divine ship continued to fly into the distance. Not long after, it sank and disappeared. Is this the supreme ancient immortal realms? The sword venerables all opened their mouths in shock. Even the Frost Sword Saint and the Aurora Sword Saint were shocked. There was a slight excitement in their eyes. Chu Mu's eyes went blank. He was shocked by the scene in front of him. The supreme ancient immortal realms. This was the supreme ancient immortal realms. At first glance, it was vast and boundless. At first glance, the sky of the supreme ancient immortal realms was higher than the sky of the ancient sword continent. It was unknown how many times higher it was. Perhaps it was 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times higher. Standing on the ground, one would feel small for no reason. An ancient aura spread between heaven and earth. It was everywhere. This made the swordsmen who came to the supreme ancient immortal realms for the first time feel very uncomfortable. This was because they could vaguely feel that the power of heaven and earth was rejecting them. Many sword venerables' faces changed. Don't be nervous. The Aurora Sword Saint, by Qingshui's voice rang in the ears of every sword venerables. This is the rejection of the supreme ancient immortal realms because you are not native to the supreme ancient immortal realms. However, this is only a temporary phenomenon. At most, you will get used to it in 3 to 9 days. Because the ancient sword continent was once a part of the supreme ancient immortal realms. Although it has changed with time, the root is the same. Hearing by Qingshui's explanation, everyone suddenly understood. They no longer felt nervous. Thinking about it, it made sense. They were not native to the supreme ancient immortal realms. It was normal for them to be rejected when they first came to the supreme ancient immortal realms. For example, when a person who was born and raised in a hot place first came to a cold place, they would feel very uncomfortable and would need some time to adapt. "What is this place?" a sword venerable asked in a trembling voice. They all knew that this was the supreme ancient immortal realms. However, the supreme ancient immortal realms was a world many times larger than the ancient sword continent. In front of them, there were many towers, mountains, and many buildings. There were also many figures. Many gazes swept over. Looking at those buildings, they were at least 100 meters tall. Some were even 1,000 meters tall. They were majestic and imposing. They were like undulating mountains that stretched endlessly. Fellow swordsmen from the small world, welcome to the supreme ancient immortal realms. This is the Sky Edge Sword Palace. A voice rang out. Following that, a figure appeared in the sky. He slowly descended with his hands behind his back. There was a smile on his aged face, and there was no contempt or disdain on his face. Either he did not discriminate against the swordsmen from the ancient sword continent, the celestial sword continent, and the other continents, or he was a scheming person who did not show his emotions on his face. Sky Edge Sword Palace. Situ Xiao and Yang Lai are disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Chu Mu thought as he looked at the old man. Now you have two choices. First, leave this place and explore on your own. In the supreme ancient immortal realms, there are countless opportunities. If you are lucky, you will be able to obtain some opportunities and become stronger. At the same time, there are countless dangers. It is much more dangerous than the small world you are in. The old man still had his hands behind his back. He had a smile on his face. His tone was neither high nor low, neither fast nor slow, but everyone could hear him clearly. Second, you can stay and become a disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Like the swordsmen of the supreme ancient immortal realms, you will have the opportunity to cultivate in the Sky Edge Sword Palace for 10 years. This was a choice. Although the old man did not explain it in detail, they were not fools. They could immediately tell. Staying in the Sky Edge Sword Palace and becoming a disciple would allow them to obtain some resources and be nurtured. But at the same time, they would have to pay a price. After all, there was no free lunch in the world. If they chose the first option and went out on their own, it would be very inappropriate. Because they did not know anything about the supreme ancient immortal realms, it would be very unwise to leave. In an instant, everyone made their decision. There is no need to say your choice. Now, those who want to go out on their own can leave, the old man said indifferently. Some of the honorable swordsmen did not look sideways. Their feet were firm as if they had taken root in the ground. Some of the honorable swordsmen looked left and right. When they saw that no one was moving, they also did not move. The old man nodded slightly. Just as he was about to speak, suddenly dozens of swordsmen walked out from each of the 9 camps. They left without looking back, ignoring the shouts of others. There is no need to shout. That is their own choice, the old man said. He suppressed the shouts. Everyone has their own aspirations. Who knows, they might be able to obtain a fortuitous encounter and soar to the sky. The honorable swordsmen in the camps that had people leave had ugly expressions on their faces. Fortunately, the 10,000 honorable swordsmen of the ancient sword continent did not move. This made honorable swordsmen very happy. At least, they were not a group of reckless people. In the eyes of everyone, the actions of the dozens of honorable swordsmen who left were very reckless. In this unknown supreme ancient immortal realms, with their strength, they were most likely courting death. Since you have chosen to stay, you will be disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace from now on. The old man continued, however, not everyone can enter the Sky Edge Sword Palace. If you want to become a true disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, you have to pass the test. Only by passing the test can you become a true disciple of the Sword Palace. If you fail, you will temporarily become a servant of the Sword Palace. Every year, you will have a chance to apply for the test. If you pass, you will become a true disciple of the Sword Palace. If you fail, you will continue to be a servant. Hearing that the old man was not targeting the swordsmen of the 9 continents, the honorable swordsman's expressions became better. After all, the title of servant was not pleasant to the ears. Now, our Sky-Edge Sword Palace will have another batch of servants. The 9 continents have a total of 90,000 people. Other than the dozens that left, there are close to 90,000 left. I don't think many of them can become true disciples of the Sky-Edge Sword Palace. In my opinion, not even 1/10 of them can become true disciples. The disciples of the Sky-Edge Sword Palace discussed. Their voices were not concealed at all and entered the ears of the honorable swordsman. Because you have just arrived in the supreme ancient immortal realms, you have not fully adapted to the supreme ancient immortal realms. Therefore, you are unable to display your true strength. I will give you 10 days to adapt. 10 days later, the test will begin. I hope that you can pass the test and become true disciples of the Sky-Edge Sword Palace. The old man said faintly. In a moment, someone will arrange a residence for you. When the time comes, someone will inform you of the test. As for the content of the test, you will naturally know when the time comes. In addition, I want to solemnly inform you that the Sky-Edge Sword Palace has its own rules. During this period, no one is allowed to cause trouble. Otherwise, you will be expelled from the Sky-Edge Sword Palace. The old man's tone was somewhat strict. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 632. The Sword Venerables from the 9 Continents. Sky Sword Continent, Divine Sword Continent, Demon Sword Continent, Blood Sword Continent, Proud Sword Continent, Ancient Sword Continent, Wanjian Continent, Swordless Continent, Demon Sword Continent, and the rest, were all arranged in a large building. They were told that they were not allowed to leave the building for 10 days. They would only be allowed to leave after the examination began 10 days later. This method was similar to house arrest, which made many people unhappy. However, they did not resist because the difference in strength was too great. They were not allowed to leave the ancient building, and others were not allowed to enter as they wished. This way, they could avoid unnecessary conflicts and protect them to a certain extent. The building was several hundred meters tall and had many rooms. However, there were close to 90,000 swordsmen from the 9 continents. They could not each stay in a room, so they could only squeeze 10 people into one room. Fortunately, the Sword Venerables did not need to rest. They just needed a place to sit cross-legged. However, as one of the most elite Sword Venerables on their respective continents, they were treated as VIPs wherever they went. They lived in huge courtyards and enjoyed delicious food and wine to their heart's content. Unlike now, they were reduced to being under house arrest, in a dilapidated building, and had to squeeze in a small room with 9 other people. This kind of treatment was as different as heaven and earth. Moreover, the immemorial Sword Venerables who led them here used a disapproving tone to explain that they were not allowed to leave the building. This was a form of protection for them, which made it even harder for them to accept, especially when the Sky-Edge Sword Palace's disciples would occasionally come to the outside of the building and point at them. They did not bother to conceal their voices. All sorts of discussions entered the ears of the Sword Venerables. Some of the discussions were just out of curiosity, while others were disdainful and even insulting. This made many of the more hot-tempered Sword Venerables furious. If it were not for their leading sword saints stopping them, it would have caused quite a big conflict and led to terrible consequences. As such, the conflict between the Sword Venerables from the 9 continents and the immemorial Sword Venerables took shape. It could be expected that there would be conflicts in the future. Those who squeezed into the same room as Chu Mu were basically acquaintances. For example, Su Haoshao, Huang Fu Huang Tian, Chen Buer and so on. As for Shangguan Qinin, she was a female and was together with the other female swordsmen. They basically did not cultivate in the past 10 days because they had not completely adapted to the immemorial sword venerables and could not cultivate. They could only feel the repulsive force outside their bodies weakening bit by bit. Some swordsmen could adapt in 3 days, while others could still feel the slight repulsive force even after 7 days. After Chu Mu got used to it and carefully experienced it, he knew that the spatial strength of immemorial world was 10 times stronger than ancient sword continent in all aspects. With his strength, he could not fly here at all. Even Su Haosha could not fly here. During this period of time, most of the people in the same room closed their eyes and pondered. Occasionally they would chat with each other. There were also some who walked out of their rooms and walked around the building to gather information. For example, the person who obtained the 3 titles of Unparalleled Sword Venerable in the Heavenly Sword Continent was the same person. His name was Fan Bufan, and he was only 36 years old. Another example would be the names of swordsmen from the Divine Sword Continent, Demon Sword Continent, and other continents who had obtained unparalleled glory. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. Nearly 90,000 sword venerables had adapted to the immemorial world. There was not much difference between them and the native swordsmen of the immemorial world. Time was up, and the test was about to begin. Close to 90,000 swordsmen left the dilapidated building and headed towards the testing grounds in a grandiose manner. The scene was extremely spectacular. This is where the test will be held. The person who led Chu Mu and the others here was a middle-aged man. He pointed at the 1,000 pitch-black entrances and said faintly, "Each entrance can only allow one person to enter at a time. When you enter, you will encounter a strong enemy. Killing the enemy will mean passing the test, and you will become an official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. If you feel that you are not a match for the enemy, just shout, 'I admit defeat.' Otherwise, you can only kill the enemy or be killed by the enemy." Turned out that people could die in the test. These bumpkins, I reckon that less than 1% of them will pass the test. It might not be 1%, but it definitely won't be more than 10%. At the edge of the testing grounds, many disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace were watching and discussing. "All right, let the test begin," the middle-aged man announced. The swordsmen of the 9 continents lined up in an orderly manner. After the middle-aged man announced the start of the test, 1,000 people immediately rushed out. Each of them executed their movement techniques and quickly disappeared into the 1,000 pitch-black entrances. Next, they just had to wait. About 30 breaths later, someone flew out of the pitch-black entrances and landed miserably. Looking at his depressed and gloomy expression, it was obvious that he had admitted defeat and didn't pass the test. What awaited him was the fate of being an errand boy. Fortunately, after becoming an errand boy, he would have the opportunity to apply for the challenge every year. If he succeeded, he would leave the errand boy status and be promoted to an official disciple. As time passed, most of the people flew out of the entrances. Their expressions were either depressed, unwilling, or gloomy. It all meant one thing: they had failed. Looking at the elimination rate, it is indeed less than 10%. Even the swordsmen of our immemorial world only have a 10% chance of passing the test. How can a bunch of bumpkins from a small world be compared to the people of our immemorial world? The mocking laughter clearly entered the ears of the 9 continents' sword venerables. A portion of the sword venerables' expression didn't change, as if they didn't hear it. A portion of the sword venerables clenched their fists and gritted their teeth. Their sharp eyes had traces of anger as they swept across the immemorial sword venerables at the edge of the testing grounds. "Shut up. Open your eyes and watch carefully. See if 10% of us can pass the test and become an official disciple." Finally, a bad-tempered sword venerate couldn't take it anymore and shouted. His voice was like thunder, rumbling and rumbling. "Oh, you're actually angry. I'll open my eyes and see if 10% of you bumpkins can pass the test," a immemorial sword venerate sneered. A battle of words is only the inferior method. A sword saint's voice rang out. It was very calm and carried an aura like a spring breeze. Most of the sword venerate's anger dissipated, and he no longer spoke. Using strength to prove himself was the best counterattack. 1,000 sword venerables after another entered the pitch-black entrances to take the test. Most of them didn't pass, and their expressions were very ugly. The 10 sword venerables, Lu Xiaolu, Wu Ping, and the others all passed the test smoothly. Unknowingly, it was Chu Mu's turn. Together with the other sword venerables, he used his movement technique and turned into a wisp of smoke that floated towards the pitch-black entrances. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. His vision darkened at first, then brightened. Chu Mu found himself in a secret room. In front of him stood a figure in a long robe. He was bald and expressionless. Even his eyes didn't have the slightest bit of flexibility. The bald man held a long sword in his hand. There was no aura on his body. More importantly, Chu Mu couldn't feel the slightest bit of life from him. As a living creature, there must be life in his body. No matter how high his cultivation was, this couldn't be changed. In other words, the bald swordsman in front of him wasn't a living creature or a human puppet. Just as this thought popped up in his mind, the bald swordsman pulled out his sword. He slid forward and stabbed out with his sword. There was a slight sound of wind breaking. It was very sharp and piercing to the ears. This sword didn't seem to have much power, but Chu Mu didn't dare to underestimate it. Indeed, when the puppet's sword stabbed out halfway, a tyrannical force instantly surged into the long sword. An extremely tyrannical sharpness gushed out from the long sword, causing Chu Mu to feel as if his throat had been pierced. This sword contained sword origin, sword essence, and profound meaning. It was very strong, causing Chu Mu's expression to change slightly. If it was more than a month ago, Chu Mu would have been able to deal with it, but it would have taken him a lot of effort and even a fierce battle. However, at this time, Chu Mu only moved his feet as if he was sliding on ice. He avoided the puppet's killing sword and their figures crossed each other. At the moment when their figures almost overlapped, a faint sword light could be seen cutting through the sky. It was like an illusion. Chu Mu and the puppet stood with their backs facing each other. Chu Mu's sword was still in the scabbard, as if it had never been pulled out. On the other hand, the puppet maintained the posture of stabbing out with its sword, as if it was frozen and motionless. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, a thin mark appeared on the puppet's neck, like a thin line. Then, its head tilted to one side and slowly slid down. With just one sword, Chu Mu killed the sword puppet. Chu Mu's face didn't have the slightest bit of complacency. In his opinion, this was necessary. However, to defeat the sword puppet and pass the test, it's still difficult for an ordinary sword venerable to do so. Chu Mu thought to himself. His body was suddenly wrapped up by a force that suddenly descended. At the same time, the headless sword puppet was also wrapped up by a strange force. A strange scene appeared. The head of the sword puppet that had fallen to the ground actually flew up into the air and landed on the headless body, perfectly connecting. Chu Mu's body also disappeared in an instant, leaving the test room. When Chu Mu saw the scene before him clearly, a sincere laughter sounded in his ears. "Brother Chu, little brother Chu, I knew that with your strength, you would definitely pass the test and become an official disciple." The person who spoke was Su Haosha. He looked at Chu Mu with a face full of smiles. Chu Mu responded with a faint smile. Other than Su Haosha, the other swordsmen who passed the test were all gathered here, but they stood according to the different continents' factions. Chu Mu swept a glance. On the ancient sword continent's side, there were about 100 swordsmen who passed the test. Compared to the 10,000 sword venerables, it was very little. However, there were still many swordsmen who hadn't taken the test yet. He believed that when the test was over, there would definitely be more swordsmen who passed the test and became official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 633. The assessment ended. Finally, the Sky Sword continent, which was ranked first among the 9 continents, had close to 2,000 people passing the assessment. On the other hand, the Ancient Sword continent had more than 700 swordsmen passing the assessment. The total number of swordsmen from the 9 continents was more than 9,600, which was just over 1/10 of the total. Subsequently, the death toll was announced. More than 3,000 swordsmen were killed in the assessment. They were unwilling to admit defeat and fought the sword puppets to the death. In the end, they died under the sword puppet swords. The remaining 70,000 swordsmen were reduced to odd jobs for the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Chu Mu noticed that among the 700 swordsmen from the Ancient Sword continent who passed the assessment, half of them were ultimate sword venerables and the other half were more powerful peak sword venerables. As for Huangfu Huangtian, Chenbuer Shangguanqinin, Zhong Qintian, Zhu Wudao, Yan Zhiyo, and Gu Jianghe, none of them passed the assessment. They might have died in the assessment or become odd jobs. No matter if it was dying in the exam or becoming a servant, Chu Mu was deeply moved. On the Ancient Sword continent, these people were the elites among the sword sovereigns and were idolized by countless people. Especially the likes of Empyrean Dao sect and Yen Nai Nether, they were the geniuses of their sects and had countless halos. But when they came to the immemorial world, they were reduced to such a state. They couldn't help but lament. Strength, everything was because of strength. The Ancient Sword continent was like that, and it was even more so in the immemorial world. Congratulations on becoming official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Another middle-aged swordsman walked over and said to Chu Mu and the other 9,000 swordsmen. He had a faint smile on his face and waved his sleeve. Now, follow me. The middle-aged swordsman turned and left in large strides. The 9,000 swordsmen followed behind. To become an official disciple, one had to comprehend items related to an official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, a sword token that symbolized an official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. The Sky Edge Sword token, a set of official disciple attire of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, a royal grade sword for official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, and a sword palace overview. The attire and sword were all green. Not only were the colors the same, but the designs were also divided into male and female designs. They didn't need to be worn on normal days and were only worn on important days. For example, the 100-year ceremony. As for the Sword Palace overview, it recorded the Sky Edge Sword Palace's information and things that the official disciples needed to know. After collecting the items, it was time to arrange their accommodations. The 3 of them stayed in a sword tower. The sword tower had 2 floors. The first floor was for sword practice, while the second floor had 3 bedrooms and a hall. The 2 swordsmen who lived in the same sword tower as Chu Mu were both from the Ancient Sword continent. One of them was called Ding Xian, who had the strength of an elite sword venerable. The other was called Jiang Chuan, who had the strength of an ultimate sword venerable. The sword tower where Chu Mu and the other 9,000 people resided was newly built a few years ago. It was quite a distance away from the Sword Tower district where the other official disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace lived. After entering the room of the Sword Tower, Chu Mu immediately took out the introduction to the Sword Palace and started reading it. This was what the middle-aged swordsman had told him to do. Otherwise, if he violated the rules, he would be punished, and he could not blame anyone else. There was a more detailed description of the Sky Edge Sword Palace in the Sword Palace overview. It was divided into 3 regions: the servant area, the official disciple area, and the elite disciple area. The 3 regions were separated into the front, middle, and back regions of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Without permission, servants were not allowed to enter the official disciple area, let alone the elite disciple area. Otherwise, it would be considered trespassing, and it would not be overboard to kill them. Similarly, official disciples were not allowed to enter the elite disciple area without permission. Otherwise, even if they were killed, no one would complain. The Sword Palace overview also stated that only by obtaining the title of Sword Venerable could one become an elite disciple. Only by obtaining the title of Sword Venerable can one become an elite disciple. The information contained in this short sentence shocked Chu Mu. In the 9 continents, every swordsman who came to the primordial world had the title of Sword Venerable. Furthermore, in their original world, they were all elites among Sword Venerables. Could it be that every one of us can become an elite disciple now? Chu Mu thought to himself. No, it can't be that simple. Could it be that the difficulty of the Sword Venerable examination in the primordial world is different from the one in the ancient Sword continent? After thinking about it, this was the only possibility. Otherwise, if it was the same, then they could directly become elite disciples. Chu Mu could not help but think of Situ Xiu and Yang Lai. According to them, they were ordinary disciples of the Sky Edge Sword Palace and not elite disciples. However, their strength was shocking, enough to match the top 10 Sword Venerables. With such strength, they were only ordinary disciples and not elite disciples. This was enough to confirm Chu Mu's thoughts. Thinking about it, it was very possible. The environment of the primordial world was more suitable for cultivation than the ancient Sword continent. The difficulty of the examination would naturally be higher. Otherwise, it would become a world filled with Sword Venerables. I just don't know what kind of strength is needed to pass the Sword Venerable examination. This was not the question of Chu Mu alone, but the question of all the swordsmen who saw the Sword Palace overview. In addition to this description, the Sword Palace overview also introduced the sacred cultivation grounds of the Sky Edge Sword Palace, such as Sword Observation Peak, Sword Cleansing Pool, Profound Sky Wall, and so on. Sword Observation Peak was a sacred cultivation ground that all official disciples could go to. It was also the lowest-level sacred cultivation ground in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. The Sword Cleansing Pool and Profound Sky Wall were sacred cultivation grounds that elite disciples could go to at any time. If official disciples wanted to enter the Sword Cleansing Pool and Profound Sky Wall to comprehend, they would have to pay the corresponding amount of Sky Edge coins. The so-called Sky Edge coins were a kind of reward given by the Sky Edge Sword Palace to disciples who contributed. In other words, it could also be called contribution points. There were several ways to obtain Sky Edge coins. One way was to complete missions of the Sword Palace and obtain Sky Edge coins according to the difficulty of the mission. The other way was to obtain rewards from the Sword Palace. For example, the 100-Year Ceremonies Grand Competition, where one could obtain Sky Edge coins according to their rank. However, such rewards were rare, and most of them were obtained through missions. In addition, trading between disciples was also a method to obtain Sky Edge coins. In short, there were not only 2 or 3 ways to obtain Sky Edge coins, but many different kinds of possibilities. The Sword Palace overview also specially stated that the Sky Edge Sword Palace encouraged challenges. Within the Sky Edge Sword Palace, there were many places with sword battle arenas. This was for the convenience of the Sword Palace's disciples to challenge each other. This was because there was no time limit or place limit for a challenge. Of course, issuing a challenge required the other party to agree. However, due to the environment of the immemorial world, battles were everywhere. Thus, if there was no special reason, once someone issued a challenge, they would not refuse. Instead, they would immediately engage in battle. In short, apart from not being able to kill the other party, even if one lost an arm or a leg, the Sky Edge Sword Palace had the corresponding treasures that could reattach a severed arm. It would be the same as before, and there would not be any side effect. The Sword Palace overview wasn't thick at all. There was a lot of content recorded in it, but most of it was concise. There wasn't a long and detailed explanation, but as long as one wasn't an idiot, one would be able to understand the meaning behind it. Not long after, Chu Mu finished reading the Sword Palace overview. With his photographic memory, he remembered everything in his mind. He also had a preliminary understanding of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. After that, Chu Mu began to cultivate the Sky Desolate Sword scripture. The immemorial world was different from the ancient Sword Continent. In the ancient Sword Continent, to cultivate the Sky Desolate Sword scripture, one either had to use the Sky Desolate Stone or the Millennium Desolate Stone Mill. Otherwise, one had to be in a special environment. However, in the immemorial world, spiritual chi and desolate chi each took up half. Furthermore, they were both 10 times denser than the ancient Sword Continent. Chu Mu did not need to use the Sky Desolate Stone at all. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu cleared his mind of distractions and entered a state of cultivation. The desolate chi in the air seemed to be summoned and rushed towards Chu Mu's body. It seeped into his skin and entered his body. As the Sky Desolate Sword energy revolved, the desolate chi was purified and transformed into Sky Desolate Sword energy. Chu Mu's cultivation had already reached the peak of the complete origin realm. However, there was still room for improvement. He needed to temper himself again and again to reach the true limit. This had nothing to do with comprehension or talent. It relied on patience and time to temper himself and improve bit by bit. Many swordsmen would stay at this level for a long time before reaching the true limit. Only then would they find an opportunity to break through. There was a huge divide between the origin realm and the God condensation realm. After a period of time, Chu Mu finished his cultivation. He suddenly thought of something. The Sky Desolate Earth Palace appeared in the ancient Sword Continent, and he finally obtained the corresponding inheritance. It seemed that the other 8 continents also had Sky Desolate Earth Palaces. Since that was the case, there should be other swordsmen who obtained the corresponding inheritance. Perhaps there were 8 other swordsmen who obtained the Sky Desolate Sword token like him. He didn't know if those swordsmen were servants or dead, or if they passed the test and became official disciples. However, Chu Mu suddenly had a feeling that they would meet sooner or later. He just didn't know if they would be friends, rivals, or enemies. He didn't continue thinking about it. He would know when the time came. He would think about it when the time came. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Chu Mu, we plan to go to the Sword Horde to see if there are any suitable technique. Do you want to come along? Jiang Chuan asked. Sword Palace Overview recorded that every swordsman who had just become an official disciple of the Sky Edge Sword Palace had a chance to choose a technique from the first level of the Sword Horde for free. It was a kind of benefit. Okay. Chu Mu thought for a while and agreed. Firstly, he wanted to see if there were any suitable techniques for him to cultivate. Secondly, he wanted to see how the Sword Horde of the Sky Edge Sword Palace was. The 3 of them left the Sword Tower together. There were many swordsmen who had the same goal as them. They walked out of the Sword Tower district in groups and headed towards the Sword Horde. For the convenience of the swordsmen, Sword Palace Overview had a simple map of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 634. A large group of people left the Sword Tower district. Following the path, they soon arrived at the Sword Horde district. Oh, these bumpkins are going to the Sword Horde district now. They really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. They must not have gained anything. When the swordsmen from the Archean world saw Chu Mu and his group, they were stunned at first and then mocked. As soon as they entered the sword repository area, everyone instantly felt a dense aura of books suffuse the air, and it filled the air. It was ancient and simple, and it contained the essence of countless years. An ancient sharp aura spiraled and flashed by, causing everyone to have a solemn expression, and they had no choice but to circulate their sword origin to strengthen their protective sword energy to resist the impact of this aura. He strode towards the Sword Horde. The closer he got, the stronger the scholarly aura became. The sharpness of the aura became more intense. Gradually, some of the swordsmen's faces showed signs of fatigue. They slowed down and gritted their teeth to resist the aura with great difficulty. Sure enough, even a free lunch was not so easy to eat. The difference in strength began to show. The ultimate sword venerables kept moving forward, while the more powerful ultimate sword venerables also seemed to have difficulty moving forward. Chu Mu also felt a lot of pressure, but he could keep moving forward with the ultimate sword venerables. The sword horde was a huge black building. It looked like a building, a bit like a giant sword inserted into the ground, emitting an endless aura. Walking through the entrance of the sword horde and into the first layer of the sword horde, the oppressive feeling instantly intensified, causing one's expression to change drastically. The first level of the sword horde was very big. There were no bookshelves, only clusters of light balls floating in the air. They were as dense as stars, making the first level of the sword horde look like a night sky full of stars. These light balls were of different colors, big and small. They were all different, and they all emitted weak and different auras. Although the aura emitted by each light ball was very weak, there were too many light balls in the first level of the sword horde. The weak auras mixed together and became very strong, forming a pressure that made the swordsmen feel unbearable and almost suffocated. It could be expected that they would not be able to stay in this place for long before they had to leave. Otherwise, they might not be able to withstand the pressure here and get injured. Since he couldn't stay here for long, he could only act quickly and find a suitable cultivation technique. Otherwise, he would have to pay the corresponding amount of sky edge coins the next time he wanted to enter this place. The swordsmen quickly spread out. When thousands of swordsmen spread out, it was like a handful of sand falling into a pool. It was difficult to find each other. Chu Mu relied on his intuition and grasp of aura to quickly search. His footsteps were extremely fast. He had to resist the impact of the aura here, and at the same time, he had to carefully sense the difference in aura of each light sphere. This was undoubtedly a very challenging task. Chu Mu realized that when he focused his attention on one of the light balls, a simple introduction of the cultivation method contained in the light ball would naturally appear in his mind. This was undoubtedly a very good method. However, there were too many balls of light here. They were like the stars in the night sky, innumerable. Trying to find a suitable cultivation method among so many balls of light was like looking for a needle in a haystack. With limited time and endless resources, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. This was a difficult problem. It was no wonder that the swordsmen from the Archean world would laugh at them like this. Based on the current situation, it could be expected that among the thousands of swordsmen who entered the first level of the sword horde, less than 1/10 of them would be able to gain anything. Of course, this was under the premise that they found a suitable cultivation method. After all, some people might be in a hurry and not want to waste this opportunity, so they would just randomly choose a cultivation method as a last resort. Chu Mu fully utilized his advantages and multitasked. At the same time, he sensed the nearby light spheres. As a result, his efficiency increased by several times, and the probability of finding a suitable cultivation method also increased greatly. Time passed little by little. Chu Mu felt that the pressure seemed to be increasing. In fact, it was not that the pressure was increasing, but that his endurance was constantly approaching the limit, resulting in an illusion. At this time, many swordsmen had already hastily chosen to leave the first level of the sword horde. Only a few swordsmen were still persevering. After sensing a few light spheres, Chu Mu received a few pieces of information and was suddenly stunned. In fact, he himself was not very clear about what kind of cultivation method to choose. The reason he came here was because of a free opportunity to enter. However, he knew too little about the situation here. In fact, even if he knew enough, he would still have to face the huge pressure here. Even if his strength improved further, he was afraid that it would be difficult for him to persist for long. There was not much difference between coming here now and coming in the future unless his strength increased greatly. However, at that time, would the cultivation methods recorded in the first level of the Sword Horde still be able to satisfy Chu Mu's needs? He locked onto one of the light spheres and sensed it more carefully. A piece of information that appeared in his mind seemed to be clearer. So it's a cultivation method for cultivating the mind. Although it's only a basic cultivation method, it's enough, Chu Mu thought to himself with a hint of joy on his face. He immediately decided to choose this cultivation method. Since he had made up his mind, Chu Mu's palm grabbed the light sphere and pressed it against his forehead. Suddenly, the light sphere flickered and a stream of information flowed into Chu Mu's mind through his forehead. Tempering Intent Technique was a very simple name. If one did not know the content, it would be difficult to imagine that this was a cultivation method for cultivating the mind. Of course, the cultivation methods recorded in the first level of the Sword Horde were relatively ordinary. Tempering Intent Technique was the most basic cultivation method for cultivating the mind. However, Chu Mu knew very well that even if it was one of the most basic cultivation methods, it would be treated as one of the top cultivation methods on the ancient Sword continent. Countless people would fight over it. This was because Chu Mu had never heard of a cultivation method for cultivating the mind on the ancient Sword continent. Perhaps there were, but it was definitely in the hands of a few experts and had never been publicized. My mental remembrance is much stronger than the average swordsman's, but I've never cultivated it because I lack a cultivation method. Hopefully, this tempering intent technique will be useful to me. Chu Mu muttered to himself and let go of the ball of light. He had already obtained the complete cultivation method of tempering intent technique. When he was receiving the information from the light sphere, the pressure around him seemed to have disappeared. Now that he was done, the pressure reappeared. Chu Mu hurriedly strode towards the exit of the Sword Horde. He quickly walked out of the Sword Horde and immediately felt the pressure lessen. At this time, the other swordsmen had basically all left the Sword Horde. Even Chu Mu's roommates had left because they could not withstand the pressure. Chu Mu walked out of the Sword Horde alone and headed towards the 9-continent Sword Tower. He could not wait to go back and comprehend tempering intent technique. He wanted to cultivate it and see how effective it was. On his way back, he would pass by a sword battle arena. On his way here, he was mocked by the swordsmen of the Archean world. "Hey, country bumpkin, do you want to go up and fight?" When Chu Mu walked past the sword battle arena, a figure flashed and appeared in front of Chu Mu. He raised his head and said to Chu Mu. His tone was somewhat disdainful and his expression was somewhat contemptuous. "Not interested," Chu Mu said. His body flashed and he walked around the other person. He could not wait to go back and cultivate tempering intent technique. Naturally, he did not want to waste any time. "Humph, coward." The other person did not chase after him. Instead, he snorted with contempt and disdain. Chu Mu naturally heard this sentence, but he did not say anything and pretended not to hear it. For him, tempering intent technique was the most important thing. As for whether the words were good or not, it all depended on what others said and his attitude. If he ignored them, then no words would work. "Chu Mu, you're back." As soon as he returned to the Sword Tower, Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian were sitting in the hall. When Chu Mu came upstairs, they greeted him. "How was it? Did you choose a cultivation method that you were satisfied with?" Jiang Chuan asked. "Not bad, but I still need to verify it. How about you?" Chu Mu asked. "I just stepped into the first level of the Sword Horde. Before I started to choose a cultivation method, I had to leave because I couldn't bear the pressure inside." Ding Xian smiled bitterly. He looked a little upset and regretful. "I'm a little better. I chose a cultivation method, but it didn't increase my strength significantly." Jiang Chuan also smiled bitterly. Most people encountered the same situation as Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan. Either they did not choose a cultivation method, or they chose a cultivation method that did not help them much. It seemed that there were very few people who really got a cultivation method that they were satisfied with. Chu Mu could be considered one of them. How about I go back to my room and meditate on the cultivation method? Chu Mu said. Okay. Ding Xian and Jiang Chuan nodded. Chu Mu walked into his room, closed the door, and sat cross-legged on the bed. He cleared his mind and began to carefully read the information in his mind. Jiang Chuan and Ding Xian chatted outside for a while before they returned to their rooms and began to cultivate. Although they did not get a good cultivation method, they could not neglect their own cultivation. Chu Mu carefully read through the contents of Tempering Intent Technique. It had to be said that although Tempering Intent Technique was a foundational technique, it was extremely suitable for laying down one's foundation. It didn't have anything outstanding about it, but it had the advantage of being stable, neutral, and peaceful. It could lay down a very good foundation and prepare for the future cultivation of secret spirit technique. Although he had not started cultivating, Chu Mu was sure that tempering mind skill would be helpful to him. Before he started cultivating, Chu Mu released his spiritual consciousness to the limit. On the ancient sword continent, when he released his spiritual consciousness to the limit, it could cover a diameter of 10,000 meters. Now that he was in the Archean world, due to various factors, he could only release his spiritual consciousness to about 100 meters. He wondered if it could be improved after he cultivated tempering mind skill. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.